Blacksmith of the Apocalypse. By Arcuser. Chapter 41. Guild and Dungeons. Are you serious? An adventurer's guild? Isn't this a little too much like a game? Seth shouted out. Finn looked at the young man having an emotional outbreak with a puzzled look. What does the guild have to do with games? It is a renowned organization which manages the entrance to dungeons, not some gambling den. Seth pinched the bridge of his nose trying to process what Finn told him. It was pretty much exactly like in novels and fiction. The Adventurer Guild was an institution of the system, similar to the System Church. They specialized in the organization of dungeons and people who would enter them, adventurers. And like the church which followed the god of the system, the guild followed a different god, the god of dungeons. Legend had it that in a time immemorial, both hit it off with each other and became best buddies during a summit of the gods. They had a drinking contest and subsequently fell into a drunken stupor. Of course, nobody could confirm this, so it stayed a legend. The fact stayed, that the two gods had a synergistic relationship. Wherever the system opened the pathworks, dungeons appeared. They would grow in suitable places and had no high requirements, which means they could grow literally anywhere. The dungeons would spawn monsters from other dimensions and pose a challenge to members of the system. Or a terrible catastrophe, if it was world without system. The monsters would gain strength and break out to attack the surroundings, if they were not regulated or closed in time. Wait. Does this mean there will be dungeons on Earth, too? Seth interrupted Finn's monologue. Naturally, and the guild will follow them. Don't worry. Thanks to the system nobody really dies in a dungeon, as long as there is no dungeon break, she calmed his worries. Finn kept going, saying that nobody died within a dungeon. Players would only lose a chunk of experience and maybe items. They would resurrect in the closest guild branch if they were registered. And in a world where no system existed, but dungeons, those people were down on their luck. And that's why the guild always follows the dungeons, and there is absolutely no need to worry, she smiled satisfied with her own profound knowledge. There was no way around it anymore. Seth had understood everything so far and could not come up any more questions, and Finn started sweating, trying to come up with any more information to convey. Both could no longer avoid the big elephant in the room. One, there was a guild branch here, so there should be a dungeon, too. Right? And most importantly too. Why did the branch look so empty and run down? And why in God's name, was the whole place in front of it stained as if covered in dried blood? The guild was a grand and robust, stone building. Town hall or guild hall would be the first thoughts that came to mind when seeing it. But the windows were broken and the shutters were crooked, some barely held by a last pitiful hinge. The stairs leading to the big entrance were covered in what could be dried blood with marks all over the place in front. It was unclear whether it had flowed out of the building, or something had dragged bloody corpses into it. One could imagine the entrance once sported a majestic pair of double-winged wooden doors. Now it was just a yawning, dark void, only shadows being visible past the entrance. Finn was nervous and even more disturbed than Seth by this sight. You have to know, that the guild was a combat-specialized organization. Even the staff would be able to deal with a crisis, to a certain extent. Something that had managed to devastate such a place gave the fairy goosebumps. The place looks old. The blood has long dried, it's almost black. Should we go in? Finn nearly lost her soul when Seth nonchalantly suggested to enter this scene of gore. Seth, on the other hand, felt that he had seen worse. You could say, any terrible thing he came across in his world was more disturbing than some old blood. He squinted and looked at her. He had even seen a blood-covered fairy berserker turn a kraken into minced meat. Leaving the baffled fairy behind, Seth strode forth to take a look inside. An unmanned guild office could hold all kinds of treasure and information. Don't think he just wanted to loot the place now. It was also important to find out, what caused this. If something like this was still within these ruins, it would be better to find out what it was, before they met it face to face. Finn followed him reluctantly. She was surprisingly meek when it came to scary stuff. Flakes of dark crimson dust came loose as he climbed the stairs. The inside of the guild was not as dark as it looked from the outside. Sun fell in through the broken windows and the air was heavy with dust particles, sparkling in the light rays. The hardwood floors were caked in a layer of old dried blood. The air smelled stale, not like blood at all. Tables and furniture were smashed, deep scratches covered the floors and wooden counters. There was a bar. But it was completely smashed and littered with glass shards. No piles of bones. No desiccated corpses or parts of them. He had even expected a nest of bones or something, but nothing. Whatever caused this bloodbath had brought away all signs of it, except the blood. Time to loot. Seth jumped over the guild counter and started rummaging the drawers with practiced hands. Hey! Stop that! Shouldn't we first find out what happened? Finn interrupted him indignantly. Seth rolled his eyes, pulled out a stack of papers and waved it in front of her. When his eyes wandered over the documents, he understood one thing: he could not read it. The signs on the buildings were easily understandable, the spoken word was understandable, but the writings here weren't. But he did not lose hope. It was time for Finn the multi-use fairy to show her skills. Seth could only facepalm when the fairy started reading the documents like a fourth grader. She was not a resident of the Empire herself, he could probably count himself lucky she was even able to decipher the meaning. Most of the stacks were different quests. Like in most novels, the guild did not just regulate the dungeons, but was also a hub to find workforce for different tasks from mercenary work, to hunting and other miscellaneous stuff. They only got 2 pieces of information from this. These ruins were called Ivisor, which now also appeared as a label on his map. And there were 2 dungeons in these ruins. One had grown in an actual dungeon under a mansion they regarded as the house of the governor or noble, or maybe the king of this city. The other was located in a big structure in the middle of the city they called a temple. According to Finn, all the quests were processed up to one certain date and then completely stopped. From the state of the guild, it must have been years since then. I guess we won't find anything more important down here. They had investigated most of the drawers, but found nothing useful except some silver and bronze coins. Maybe in the offices upstairs? I am sure at least the office of the guild master should have something important, the fairy suggested. So, they started to systematically search the other rooms of the building. Some were meeting rooms, others personal offices. The papers they found there were of no help. Some contracts reaffirmed the period of when this branch had stopped operating, but they found nothing about why. The most interesting for Seth was the personal living space of the guild staff. He found some spare weapons and armor there that gave off a faint light in the dark. His blacksmith's eyes showed him basic options, so they were probably enchanted. The options were nothing extraordinary. Slight decreases or increases in damage or defense or tiny buffs on attributes. He would look further into it later. Now was not the time. Finally, they reached the office of the guild master. It was the highest floor, right below the roof. It had a big desk in the middle and a window looking out onto the ruins. It was remarkably similar to Simon's office. It also had these walls of books and miscellaneous stuff stored on shelves. As the items of a guild master and former adventurer, these were a lot more interesting to Seth than the kitsch the priest collected. With his blacksmith's eyes he found a bunch of interesting crafting material on the shelves. Aside from several common and uncommon minerals he could not really use, there were 3 tiny lumps of dark silver dirt that turned out to be mithril ore. Mithril ore, crafting material. Rare. Stronger than steel and with a high compatibility with magic, mithril is one of the most sought after and versatile metals. Another very interesting thing he found was a tooth. Drake tooth, crafting material. Uncommon. The tooth of a young drake. As the tooth of a dragon race it has inherent penetrative force that can easily pierce steel and stronger armors. As he was looking over the shelves for a second time, to make sure he had not missed any goodies, he heard a gasp behind him. Finn had done detective work, while Seth was distracted. There were logbooks of the guild master stored in the shelves, but the last one was missing. After looking around she had found some blood sprinkles on the dirt-caked carpet that covered most of the floor. They had followed the trail that abruptly ended in front of a bookshelf. Obvious signs of a secret door. So, she started pulling out books left and right. The fairy had just taken a break. She gasped when suddenly a part of the shelf in front of her swung open. Did Seth do something? Behind the shelf was a small cabinet. A desk, a chair, writing utensils, a safe and a desiccated corpse. The skeleton's face, only covered in dried-up skin and a long beard, was frozen in an expression of fear and pain. It desperately pressed a big book to its chest. The clothes it wore had been drenched in blood, which had also spilled on the floor and the book. This was probably the guild master. He had a big wound in his stomach. He must have fled up here to hide and bled out in his hideout. The book he held in his last moments was the missing log about the latest guild operation. Chapter 42. Guild log. The book was half filled with the personal logs of the guild master, with the last written pages in the middle smeared with blood. Try starting a few pages before the last ones, Seth suggested the obvious. 23rd day of Snowfire, year 564, Namiya calendar. Guild operations are nominal. Our request for the deployment of a A-rank party, and a high-level scribe, for the further exploration of the ancient temple has been granted. Monster activities of the temple ruins are becoming abnormally high, especially on the lower floors. Once we find the dungeon core, I will request the guild for permission to close this dungeon. The artifacts and materials don't warrant the risk taken by the adventurers to cull the hordes. 30th day of Snowfire, year 564, Namiya calendar. Guild operations are nominal. The A-rank party crypt raiders, specialized in the exploration of old ruins and tombs, have arrived. They will start their dive into the dungeon tomorrow. Reports of temple guardians and tomb priests from the lower floors appearing on the shallow levels have come in. Something is happening on the lower floors. The next few entries were short and without much content. Dungeon dives had been paused until the return of the A-rank party. 8th day of Green Ice, year 564, Namiya calendar. Guild operations are partly paused. It has been over a week now and there are no signs of the crypt raiders' return. They have also not respawned. I will send a scout party to look for them. The mansion dungeon shows signs of change, too. The creatures in the depths seem to get stronger and started roaming all floors unconditionally. 2 parties have already been vanquished and taken huge losses. 12th day of Green Ice, year 564, Namiya calendar. Guild operations are on lockdown. 3 parties have not returned from the mansion dungeon. I have decided to stop all regular operations. I will ask for the permission to close the mansion dungeon. No sign from the scout party sent into the ancient temple, either. At this point I hold no hope for crypt raiders' return. 13th day of Green Ice, year 564, Namiya calendar. Guild operations are on lockdown. After reporting the uncommon events, permission to shut down the mansion dungeon was granted. I have sent our strongest B-rank party Dune Hawks to destroy the mansion's dungeon core. No signs of activity from the ancient temple. Should I send another scout party? 20th day of Green Ice, year 564, Namiya calendar. The Dune Hawks party did not return. Scouts report that the mansion dungeon has ceased activity. I am sending a rescue party in to look for them. The second scout party I sent to the ancient temple have fortunately returned. Their reports are unsettling. They met beasts from the lower floors right after entering. The beasts had the unknown status corrupted and showed heightened aggression and increase in overall stats. The D-rank party fled the scene without exploring any further. Ancient temple might be close to a dungeon break. 21th day of Green Ice, year 564, Namiya calendar. I convened with the headquarters in Shike. We will pack up and evacuate the ruins tomorrow. The guild will send several high-rank parties to subjugate the temple and shut down the ruins once and for all. This is the last entry of Guildmaster Kano Mead of the Ivisor branch. It was the last formal entry on the blood-smeared page in the middle of the book. Until here everything was written in a fine and orderly handwriting, even Seth could see this. The next lines were messily spread over the opposing page, ugly and written in a hurry. Finn had a tough time deciphering the scribbles. To whoever may find this book, I pray you can read these lines in time and be fortunate enough to leave with your life. Take this book and leave these cursed ruins as fast as your feet may carry you. Please bring this book to the headquarters in Shike and report your findings. The code of the safe behind me is 234,548. May the funds be your reward of this quest. Ding! A quest has been triggered. Quest, Guildmaster's last request. Difficulty, D. You have encountered the remnants of the Ivisor Guild branch and found the Guildmaster's last request. Take the guild log with you and bring it to the guild branch in Shike to make the fate of Ivisor known. Requirement, bring the book to Shike and give it to the current Guildmaster. Rewards, contents of the Guildmaster's safe, upfront payment, experience. Do you accept the quest? Seth talked about it with Finn. They did not see any problem with the quest, since Shike was revealed to be their destination from the start. The label had appeared on the town, they were aiming for after reading the name in the journal. They accepted the quest readily. But the Guildmaster's note did not end here, so Finn kept reading after the short interruption by the system. What followed was a report on what happened here. This is Kano Mead, Guildmaster. The Ivisor branch has been wiped out. We had planned to evacuate tomorrow, but it was too late. They came right after nightfall. It was an ambush in absolute silence. The guild staff hurriedly prepared and confronted them in front of the guild when we heard the screams of the adventurers across the ruins. We were barely able to see our attackers in the shadows. They resembled the creatures of the ancient temple, but only in shape. They were so strong and so fast. They merged into the darkness of the night, with their skin looking as if they were bathed in tar. Creatures that resembled those we knew already gave us a hard time. Then came abominations we never saw before. I only saw my subordinates die randomly in the flickering light of torches and magic lanterns as if the night itself cut them to pieces. I am writing this after escaping with my life like a coward and hiding like a rat in my personal cabinet. I was wounded by a giant claw piercing my abdomen. I can hear their scuttling on the floors below. The crunching as they feast on my colleagues. I do not think I will ever leave my hiding spot again. If these lines reach any of the guild's higher-ups, even if they are not helpful, please take them as a warning. Do not underestimate this place. Do not come here at night. They fear the light, so travel by day. Seth and Finn looked at each other and suddenly rushed to the window. It was already evening and the sky was colored in the red hue of dusk. They swore in unison. There was no time to leave the ruins before night fell. Maybe we can hide? The guildmaster wasn't eaten in his cabinet, Finn suggested. Yeah, but that was in a night where everything here was oozing with blood, right? If anything out there can smell us, especially you, we are done for in this little room. Seth's argument made sense to the smelly little fairies, so they decided to leave after looting the safe. The safe contained a few bags of coins totaling to 150 gold, 210 silver, and 500 copper. There were also 2 promissory stones over 50 gold. And a tiny red gem. Blood garnet, crafting material. Rare. A crimson red gemstone created within the body of dragon-type monsters. A good conduit for magic, especially fire and strengthening magic. Another rare crafting material. He was in this world for less than a week and already found a bunch of good stuff. Having looted the place and stored away the book, they left the guild. Seth's keen gamer instincts told him that they had only one chance to survive. Cheese it. It was time to prepare some things. Chapter 43. Cheese for everyone. Once the hateful sun vanished behind the horizon and left the world in darkness, they left the depths of their lair. They had been the guardian of the temple and servants of the gods in a time immemorial. Their realm had been great and their influence reached far across the continent. They had sacrificed their lives and the vitality of their domain to seal an age-old evil below the foundation of their deity. Here they had found their final resting place as honorable heroes of their people. In luxurious crypts they had been entombed for their great deed. Their people had to leave their now inhospitable lands afterwards. For millennia they had rested in the peaceful embrace of death, until a new power found its way into the old halls of the already forgotten temple. Rise, it had told them, and breathed new power in their mummified remnants. And thus, they rose again. Despite their new master, their task had never changed. Protect the temple, keep the seal shut. The power grew the temple. More floors and more layers spread, more traps and more forces. And the room of the seal kept sinking deeper, and the guard followed to protect it. Unknowing beasts and adventurers came and their corpses changed to become the guardians towards the surface. Intruders came. They were weak in the beginning, but knew what they were doing. And even if they died, they would come back stronger and better prepared. The guardians were slain too, but the cruel new master resurrected them again and again, to fulfill their duty. They could not let those ignorant heathens lay hand on the depths of the temple. They might break the seal, making their sacrifice worthless. The intruders grew in strength and the seal grew weak with age. More of the true guardians swept to the upper floors to hold the ground. It was all for naught in the end. A group of intruders unlike any that had come before easily destroyed their ranks and broke through into the core of the ruins. Impossible to be reasoned with, the intruders and the master fought, and in their stupid squabble damaged the old seal. Their biggest worries had come true. The ancient seal that had grown vulnerable from age and the lack of their deity's power finally gave in. The terrifying power of the old evil seeped out of the cracks and took root in the foolish minds of the adversaries. Following this, the evil spread throughout the dungeon and took hold of those that had once defeated it, making them its servant. More, it demanded. Its highest goal was to spread, and they could only oblige and watch in horror as their bodies turned. New strength flooded their bodies as dried and old bones were soaked in a power as dark as ink. Trapped in their own bodies, they could only watch themselves be subservient to their old enemy. Every time their body killed, their victim would also turn into a corrupted servant. None of them vanished and came back later like it had been before. From then on, every night they were compelled to leave the dungeon and wander through the ruins of their once glorious home, searching for more beings to corrupt. They started with the base and camps of the intruders, who had caused all this. One of their holy beasts had fought valiantly and tried to lower the numbers of infected, but died in the hands of the people that once worshipped it. Later came another group of intruders. They were stronger than the ordinary ones, but still fell under their overwhelming numbers and the holy beast that had joined their ranks. Tonight, smelled like fresh life. Somebody had wandered into these old ruins and unknowingly had disturbed its stale air. Melancholy grasped his heart at the thought, that his mindless body would again slaughter an innocent soul, to add among their ranks. The strongest scent came from the old base of the intruders, so him and the others rushed there like bloodhounds in absolute silence. Were the newcomers staying there? Why was there a hint of themselves among the newcomers' odor? Chink! Clink clink, he slowed down. Every step suddenly made the noise of metal hitting stone. Some of those beside him lost their balance and fell, which caused even more tinkling. He lowered his gaze to his foot that had been pierced by a sharp iron tip. Looking around, the familiar ground and fallen comrades were riddled with caltrops. They did minor damage to them, but still disrupted the movement and slowed them down. Who had, looking around further, the ground was littered with wooden scraps. They all sniffed and followed the human scent into an alley a little further away. They looked up in unison. Up there on one of the highest walls still standing in the vicinity stood a human figure, with the two moons as a backdrop. Even though it was not the sun, the moonlight of the two moons was bright enough to force them to avert their eyes. Up here on the wall stood Seth, ready to stall for time until the sun would rise again. The crowd he saw below him was actually quite terrifying. Not much more than dried leathery skin tightly wrapped around undead bones. It reminded him of air-dried mummies he had seen pictures of on the internet and TV. Their eyes glowed in a red sheen and their teeth were sharpened to tips. They wore no weapons as their fingernails had grown to vicious claws. Ancient rags saved Seth an unpleasant view by barely covering their most important parts. Other than that, the description of the guild master was right. Their bodies were pitch black, so dark that details vanished in the twilight and shadows below the moons. Temple Guardian leave dash. Their level was too high for Seth's observation. There was no way he could get rid of this horde. It came all down to buying time. Their reaction when looking at the moon reinforced his confidence in their strategy. Thunk. Ding. Critical hit. Thanks to the effect of Vengeful Hunter Bow, you have hit target's right eye. A flaming arrow hit the eye of one of the squinting mummies. It stood there for a moment before falling to the ground, screaming, and writhing in pain. The ones around it scattered away to evade the brightly burning flame. Its health bar appeared, but it did not take much damage from the arrow. A small flame lit up the silhouette on in the wall. He heard the sound of an arrow being released and lost sight in his right eye. Normally this would have been nothing. Their bodies had become hardened and sturdy when the corruption seeped in and they were unable to feel pain. Then why? Why did the light of this fire burn his skin? Why did it feel as if the fire that entered his empty skull had pierced into his soul? Just what was this, pain? The first reason he had taken the high ground. It was easy to hit targets bound to the ground. Second reason, they would have a hard time getting up. Suddenly several mummies nimbly like ninjas wall-jumped between the facades on both sides of the alley to get up to him. Some lost grip thanks to the caltrops stuck in their hands and feet. Seth managed to shoot two down, who fell to the ground twitching and crying in pain like the first one. But finally, one reached him. Only to suddenly be hit by a fairy-sized projectile. The force made the mummy instantly vanish from Seth's field of view as it shot off into the distance. Second reason, they would have a hard time getting up here. Watching the effect of the fire, convinced Seth that it was even more effective than anticipated. Despite not doing much damage, it had a great crowd control effect. Being hindered in climbing, the creatures finally felt bothered by the caltrops stuck in their appendages. They tried pulling them out, while dodging the flaming arrows and the searing light that came with them. But the rough barbs Seth had forged on the tips of the caltrops gave them a hard time, and ripping them out with force even caused some permanent damage which severely affected their movement. Seth sneered as he started to specifically aim for the impeded enemies. Finn was not relaxing during this time. She took it upon herself to intercept any mummies attempting to climb the walls. The opponent's levels were in the later 30s, but showed a lot higher stats than the level suggested. It fit the descriptions in the log. Finn had no problem intercepting them, as long as she was not entangled into a fight with these monsters. It took a while for the undead to back off from Seth's wall. Even so, the fire and arrows did not much damage. They inherently feared the light and pain they brought. A pain they had never known. On the wall, Seth still had 1.5 a stack of arrows left. Arrows were a pain to make, so he had stocked up on regular ones in starta. It was when he took a small breather, a dark projectile suddenly shot past Seth's cheek and almost made him fall off his wall in surprise. Another managed to hit him in the side and he crouched down on the wall, coughing blood. It felt like a gut punch that crushed his internal organs. His health instantly plummeted to the lower 800s. "Who?" he muttered. Among the crowd that had taken some distance from the alley littered with burning arrows, new opponents had appeared. Compared to the almost naked guardians, they wore white and flowing robes riddled with holes and dirt. Temple Priest's Leave Dash. A caster class. Like an affirmation, another volley of black projectiles were fired at him. They were not very fast, but almost invisible in the night. The injured Seth was barely able to evade them by the skin of his teeth. It was a harmonic song that alleviated his suffering. Finn the Battle Priest had finally come to his aid. The leaving pain left a gap to be filled with wrath. What they can, Seth could do too. But better. He pulled out another secret weapon and in the next moment a spiked ball of flames came down among the crowds of dried-up corpses. It was actually just a piece of wood from the guild branch he had studded with spikes and set on fire. Similar to the caltrops, the spiked wood stuck to the undead, when Seth hit them correctly. And even if he did not, they would become flaming caltrops among the horde of undead and force them to scatter. Seth knew from the log that he had no chance to fight these things in an open battle, so he had thought up a number of simple ways to spread fire and chaos among them. Watching the scrambling undead, of which some had tuned into torches after being hit by the flaming caltrops, made Seth unwittingly laugh. So, what if they were super strong and super high level? They will all burn. Burn. Ding. Title: Arsonist has ranked up to Arsonist Leave 2. You take pleasure in the despair of your victims burning in the flames. Ding. Skill: Fire Affinity Leave 8 has become Fire Affinity Leave 9. The abrupt system notification interrupted his little power trip. Instead of reveling in the glory of his strategies working, Seth restarted firing arrows aiming for the priests. Chapter 44. The Holy Beast? So far, the strategy was working. When the crowd split up because of the fire, Finn was also able to interrupt the priests. As a caster class, their defenses were much lower, so the fairy could finally deal some heavy damage among the opponents. The burning status had also started to show its worth as a dot damage over time. Most of the temple guardians were missing 1/4 to 1/3 of their health bar. Still, their numbers kept increasing and the hurt ones were swapped out. Seth had spent about 1/3 of his flaming caltrops and had a stack of arrows left. Looking at the position of the moon, it should be about midnight. They had already made it half the way. Ding. Critical hit. Thanks to the effect of Vengeful Hunter Bow, you have hit target's left eye. And then something happened he had never anticipated. One of the guardians with more than half its health remaining suddenly keeled over after he hit it with an arrow. Again. His remaining left eye was gone, too. He was blinded and the searing fire once again entered his skull with its soul-piercing pain. I can no longer endure. Was he losing consciousness? After being trapped in this body for half an eternity, was he finally? Ding. You have killed Temple Guardian Leave 38. You have earned experience. Ding. Skill: Weapon Mastery, Adept, Leave 3 has become Weapon Mastery, Adept, Leave 4. Ding. You have leveled up. You are now Leave 14. Ding. You have leveled up. You are now Leave 15. Ding. Inventory has been extended. Ding. New class skill has been unlocked. Check your skill window. Ding. You have completed the quest the next level 2. You have earned new system rights. Ding. You have received follow-up quest the next level 3. Ding. You have leveled up. You are now Leave 16. Ding. You have leveled up. You are now Leave 17. Seth's jaw fell open as a flood of energy rushed into his body and dissipated once he reached Leave 17. Not just his, Finn's jaw dropped, too. And even the mummies surrounding the fallen one were baffled to see one of their own leave just like that. They had really managed to kill one. The horde reacted ferocious and started to charge at him again. The fresh additions ignored the fires on the ground and attempted to wall jump to reach Seth once again. Finn had to work hard to stop them. They held out for another hour, and when Seth decided that it was time to change location, the situation suddenly changed completely. All mummies retreated respectfully and lined up to build an alley. What came through this alley was the incarnation of an eldritch horror. The creature was easily 15 meters long. Armored with ink-black chitin plates covered in tumorous growths. Its body was carried along by hundreds of pairs of sharp insect legs. The front stood upright like an upper body with its head held high like a royal. It looked like the mix of a centipede and a scarab, with the scarab being the head with a neck shield and the body of a centipede. Not fitting to either of the parts were the two pairs of arms ending in long scythes not unlike those of a mantis that sprouted from the upper body. The three pairs of eyes along the scarab-shaped head focused on Seth with an intense gaze. "This is your end, young human. It is regrettable, but you shall find the end of your journey at my hands. Give up," an old soothing voice echoed in his head. An aura of absolute dominance spread from the creature and culled any type of hope in their hearts. Still, Seth used observation. H number Li Bea *T-. Holy beast? Sure, it resembled some of the carvings he had seen in the city. But was this really something they had worshipped here? He could barely even see the name of this thing. Maybe it really was the end. This thing just seemed so strong. Even Finn had retreated in fear and landed on his shoulder. "What should we do?" she whispered into his ear. Even the fairy was unable to see the level or full name of the beast. Seth looked at the night sky, desperately thinking about his options. Thunk! An arrow burning brightly with a pale blue flame bounced off the thick chitin armor of the holy beast. Struggle was his answer. "You are not even the field boss. Like hell, I'm going to give up. Come at me, if you dare," he scowled with rude gesture involving his middle fingers. He then continued peppering the quietly standing undead with arrows. He even used one of his most precious resources to provoke the beast. He chucked a Molotov cocktail at the beast, setting it and the surroundings ablaze. The minions screamed, but the boss took no damage at all. "You have asked for this, human," the voice said, now slightly disgruntled. It had wanted to give them a merciful death, but was rejected. The giant centipede rushed along the alley, made a swerve, and started vertically running up the wall. "I did not expect that, but it's all or nothing now," Seth mumbled nervously. He waited for the right timing. When the beast had climbed the wall about halfway up, he decided it was time. Seth summoned a big anvil, probably bigger than himself. It made the wall they stood on look thin, and Seth had to use all his power to slowly tilt it over the edge. The sturdy wall, that had probably withstood millennia, showed signs of crumbling under the pure weight of this anvil, as it slowly slid off the edge. Rapidly gaining speed after being released into the air and left to the forces of gravity, the anvil shot towards the enemy. It was already too late. The beast could not evade any more, when it finally understood what Seth had thrown at it. On the other hand, it was not too worried. It was just an anvil, what could possibly? Thump! The whole alley quaked and debris fell off the ruins in the surrounding, as the anvil smashed into the ground. Not just the ground. Impaled by its horn and pinned below it in a massive crater lay the holy beast. It was not dead. It wriggled and struggled trying to free itself, but it was solidly nailed to the ground, like an insect in a collector's showcase. Anvil of Tartarus, crafting station. This is an anvil of Hephaestus that was used to measure the distances of heaven and Tartarus. It fell 9 days from heaven to earth, and 9 days from earth to Tartarus. It did not break. Aura of Hephaestus, 25% increase in stats and production speed. Aura of Gaia, 10% increase in durability. Aura of Tartarus, 50% increase of soul properties. Spirit Smithy Leave 4 had unlocked with Leave 15, and the level up changed his trusty anvil into a giant beast of steel, compared to before. "How dare you, human! This kind of disrespect! You will pay," it screeched and hissed, but was firmly stuck there. The beast ranted on and on, but Seth could see that its HP had barely taken a hit. The beast was accounted for, but seeing their holy beast be humiliated like this made the mummies furious. They entered the enraged status and started mindlessly charging. "Time for Plan B. Let us go," Seth told Finn and climbed down from the house. Another 2 Molotov cocktail found their way to the ground, freeing some space for him to land. Time for the final secret weapon, the plumbata. Seth set the rope that was attached to the oversized throwing darts on fire and chucked them into the horde. Even in their rage they instinctively evaded the flame and separated, forming a corridor for Seth's escape. Their destination was the guild branch. The mummies soon got back on their track and easily caught up to the low-level low-agility blacksmith, who was cautiously evading his own traps. That was until the low-agility blacksmith used his last remaining flaming caltrops and molotovs to set the scattered wooden scrap doused in alcohol ablaze, turning the whole place in front of the guild hall into a sea of fire. Once again, the undead backed off. What will we do now? The wood scraps 1t burn long. It's still a few. Ho, are you undressing? The panicking fairy screamed and covered her eyes. Her face became red like a tomato. You will be flying high up. That should be a safe zone. I, on the other hand, will stay here and take a cozy fire bath for the last few hours before dawn, he explained as he stored all his clothes and equipment into his inventory, so they would not burn. Seth was in the guild master office looking down at the sea of flames wearing nothing but his birthday suit. He stood there until the flames outside weakened. He then started systematically setting fire to the guild hall. From the offices to the staff quarter. All the way from the top, down to the ransacked entrance hall with its dismantled floor, missing counters and smashed up bar. Let's hope this lasts till morning, Seth mumbled as his sore body plopped down in the middle of the flames. Chapter 45. A little break. Hidden in the flames of the burning guild branch, Seth had finally some time to take a breather. He massaged his sore body, that had been hit by a few more dark projectiles during their escape. He was lucky that it hit the plate armor this time and not the cloth. Big dark bruised came to light after he had unequipped the dented steel plates. Seth had finally time to really check his status. Name, Seth Smith. Affiliation, System Church. Title, Faster Than the Thought. Level, 17. EXP, 57%. Race, Orihuma. Sex, male. Age 23. Class, Spirit Blacksmith, unique. Affiliation, none. Health, 730/1000. Mana, 170/224, 220 plus 4,4. Strength 45. Dexterity 45. Agility, 30. Intelligence 17 plus 5. Willpower 35. Endurance 45. Personality 12. Luck 18, plus 10. Free AP, Attribute points 39. Free SP, Skill points 3. Defense. Physical, 250, 120 plus 50 plus 80, ENDX 3. Magical, 100, 60 plus 25 plus 15, WILX 2. Fire resistance 100%, 50% plus 90%. Skill window. Blacksmith, Apprentice, Leave 7, 40%. Enchantment, Beginner, Leave 1. Goldsmith, Beginner, Leave 1. Blacksmith Size Leave 3. Blueprint, Apprentice, Leave 2. Soul Infusion Leave 2. Spirit Smithy Leave 4. Spirit Capture Leave 3. Weapon Mastery, Adept, Leave 4, 98%. Calm Reaction, Passive, Leave 7. Fear Resistance Leave 7. Fire Affinity Leave 9. Fire Manipulation Leave 6. Map Leave 4. Observation Leave 2. Concealment Leave 4. His health bar had taken quite a hit, but at least he had no negative statuses. Seth's eyes wandered over his attributes and then to his skill window. Level 15 had brought a lot of changes. In his time of need his instincts made him bet on the spirit smithy and leveled it up. The changes that came with it, was the Anvil of Tartarus and fitting with the new goldsmith that had been added. Jeweler's table, crafting station, locked. A workstation to create fine and small pieces of work. Fitted with all the tools needed to make accessories and cut gems. Dexterity trial needed to unlock. Seth had no idea what the dexterity trial was, but that could come later. Fire affinity was closing in on Leave 10, would it also rank up then? Fire manipulation had also leveled up during the fight unbeknownst to him. When he wanted to use Goldsmith to see what it did, he actually found a small arrow beside the skill in the skill window. Most skills had this little arrow. Had this always been there? When he thought about clicking it, and small tooltip opened with the caption Perks. Perks? Below this caption in the small window beside Goldsmith it stated Accessory Catalog. When Seth tried actually using the skill it really opened a window called Accessory Catalog filled with basic and common blueprints of necklaces, rings, bracelets, and other jewelry he could make at a goldsmith's table. Were these the new system, right? A perk list? He checked the spirit smithy and the perk list mentioned all the crafting stations that were added or had changed with the level up and option to summon separate stations. It saved Seth the time to find out the changes by trial and error. Looking through his skill window, not all skills had perks mentioned in the tooltip. Seth was the last person who would complain about quality of life changes to the system, but like the party option, this was just a nice to have. All the system rights until now did not really change a lot. Lastly, his attention fell onto the quests. Unspectacularly, the quest the next level 3 just stated to reach level 20. Until now he unlocked new skills and rights every 5 levels. Would this keep going? The sight of the meager 3 SP he still had left now made him almost regret putting so many skill points into map. As the skill number increased, they seemed more precious the higher his level climbed. After some deliberation he decided to put the remaining 3 into Blacksmith SI and get it to level 4, 2. Seth actually had a sneaking suspicion after the Spirit Smithy's crafting stations were not improved past rare material. And he was right. Blacksmith SIs did not grow to be able to appraise whatever rating came past rare. It got other perks instead. Perk list unexpectedly showed its worth. Perks added were: gain the blueprint of common items during appraisal. Disassemble items up to rare to gain the blueprint. It reminded him of the scan in enchantment. So now he could also gain blueprints on his own. The last change he noticed on accident was that his inventory had stopped growing in both directions. This time he had only gained 5 new slots, bringing the overall number to 30, instead of 36. So even the system had a limit when it came to free inventory space. After checking the changes of his status, he stared out from the fire surrounding him. Seth could only make out the red glimmer of their eyes, in the darkness beyond the fire's shine. He looked around the room he sat in. The fire had spread evenly across every surface of the building. The wood in this world was sturdier than he expected. It burned slow and Seth estimated it would take another 15 minutes before he had to start dodging falling debris. Should he distribute his attribute points now? He frowned at the 39 AP, this made it hard to distribute them so he got even numbers. Seth stayed with his original method of distribution and focused on STR, Dex, followed by End and Will. He added 10 to Strength and Dexterity and 5 to Endurance and Willpower. As he pondered what to do with the remaining 9, he looked outside at the evil eyes that waited for their chance to rip him apart. He put the remaining 9 into Agility. If something goes wrong, it's better to run faster, I think. The impact after confirming the distribution was instantaneous. Compared to before, he was not surprised and overwhelmed this time. The increase, compared to his previous numbers, was not too big, so he had a better chance to discern what was happening to his body. His muscles bulged up because of the strength and then condensed because of agility and endurance, he guessed. His headache also had lessened and his hand seemed nimbler and more delicate, despite being covered with light calluses. A shocking thought came to his mind. If he were only increased strength and dexterity, would he end up looking like a buff uncle with the hands of fair lady? The sound of crumpling ceilings and yielding beams brought him back to reality. The guild hall was starting to break down and Seth had no choice but to leave the building. Just the time inside the guild had bought him almost an hour. He was sure that if he kept staying close to the flames and inside their light, he could weasel his way out a stall until dawn. He did not expect that he would start dodging outside, too. Once he left the building covered in dense light, the temple priests restarted their barrage of dark projectiles. Even so, they tremendously weakened the closer they came to light. Seth had no leeway to be hit. He was naked as can be, and could not don his armor, as it might be damaged in the fire. Finn, flying high up above the spectacle, covered her eyes with a beet red face. But, following the old heroic rule which stated peeking is not looking, she still watched through the gap of her fingers. For several hours she watched the well-built but naked young man jump and dodge around with a great bonfire as a backdrop. Seth prayed for the morning to come. He could hear the high-pitched giggles in the air above and swore he would get his revenge someday. Finally, the shower of projectiles stopped and the undead fled, as the first rays of light peeked over the edges of the ruins. Seth had survived. Chapter 46. Last words. The sun had finally returned to its rightful place, and so did Seth's clothes. Seth. Are you okay? Finn was really worried, the little fairy asserted. Don't give me that. I heard you laugh up there, he said while fixing his traveling clothes. Brr. It's not Finn's fault. Seth jumped around naked like a deviant, she pouted sulky and turned away, so the young man couldn't see her blush. I did this for survival, Seth defended his actions. Ding. Title, Survivalist Deviant gained. Survival is nudism. Nudism is survival. You need 5% less food and water when naked in the wilderness. Oh, shut up, Seth said annoyed. And then spent some time to explain to Finn, that he had not meant her. Seth, with Finn on his shoulder, stepped out on the street covered in burned wreckage. All enemies were gone, even the one corpse had vanished. Not everyone vanished. They heard the scraping and scratching of hundreds of legs in the alleyway. The holy beast was still stuck under the anvil, or was it? This was not the same beast as last night. The black tar-like color had vanished together with the disgusting cancerous growths had covered its outer shell. The beast stuck in the alley had a pure white chitinous exoskeleton reminiscent of porcelain with golden rims. Its underbelly was dark silver and the scarab-like head sparkled in bright gold. Had the sun restored its original appearance? This looked a lot more like a holy beast. Still weird to worship this, but reasonable. Human. You are back, the harmonious voice said. It sounded a lot more friendly and seemed to hide a hint of amusement. Wisdom and peace vibrated in its voice as it continued. Do not worry. I will follow my destined fate soon, not that the curse is gone. If not for it moving this body, I would have died a long time ago. I still hoped you would come before it happened. I waited for you. Me? Seth asked warily. It was still stuck under his anvil. What would it do, cast a curse before finally dying? Yes. You, it affirmed as its body started crumbling like ashes and a pure white spirit was left to stand before Seth. I wanted to thank you before I leave. Take this. Ding. You have been blessed by a holy beast. Mark of Ivisor has been added to your status. The phantom touched Seth's forehead and then vanished without a trace. He blinked puzzled. Mark of Ivisor? Was it a skill? When he looked at his status it was just there. It was literally just there, without any explanation or function to it. He could just hope it was not like a bee sting, where you get marked by pheromones, and all the other bees who smell it start stinging you, too. He could really refrain from meeting such a foe again. Finn just looked at Seth weirdly. She acted like she had neither seen nor heard any of it when Seth tried to explain what had happened. Finn only saw the big worm crumble to dust. Finn will trust Seth, she said, acting cute again. And that was all of this. Done with their bickering they hurried along and soon managed to reach the outskirt of the ruins, where the sand once again ruled the lands. Hey, is that vegetation over there? Is that an oasis in the distance? Finn suddenly asked. Seth checked the map. It was not an oasis. At some point, they had come very close to the river that crossed this desert. No, it's actually a river. It is not the direct way, but we could follow the river all the way to Zhike, Seth answered the fairy's question. Stupid human. Dumb Seth, she suddenly exclaimed and hit his shoulder with her tiny fists, why did you not say that there was a river? Finn has a boat. We could have traveled on the river all this time. Wait. You have a boat? Is this suddenly shaft craft? Why do you have a boat just like that? How would I have known you have a boat? Why did you not tell me that you have a boat? Finn almost drowned once. Finn feels safer with a boat. Finn's emotional support boat. Why would Finn tell you of her boatie? Boatie needs water. There was no water for boatie. Why didn't Seth aim for the river, to begin with? Be boatie. That's. The river was a detour and I have more than enough water in my inventory. Why would I aim for the long way when what I lack is food? Food is my emotional support, no. Whatever. We have a boat and there is a river. Let us stop arguing and get out of here. The few sparsely growing palms and bushes surround the river blocked the noon sun as they reached the river. Here the fairy pulled out a very sturdy-looking rowboat. Seth and Finn were very tired, but Seth demanded to cook a proper lunch before they left. With tired minds, but filled bellies, they entered the boat and left the hard work to the steady current of the river. Lying in the boat, both rested on the edge between falling asleep and barely staying awake as they did not know what danger would lurk in the water. Nothing happened for a long time and when night came again, they anchored in the middle of the river and slept on the boat. Despite the existence of desert kraken, the river actually seemed safe. They peacefully drove down the idly flowing river for several days. The scenery slowly changed during their journey. The sand dunes past the green banks of the river made way for a vast expanse of dry grassland and steppe. Seth used the break to finally appraise the equipment he had found in the guild. Most of them had only slight variations of common schematics made from iron or steel and did not suffice to give him new blueprints. Some of them had special properties because they were made of monster materials, and Seth got some common and uncommon blueprints from them and new entries in the material catalog. Only one or two had true enchantments on them. Seth tried to scan them with enchantment by pulling them into the scan slot. The weapons disintegrated and he got simple circuits for engraving. They would increase damage and durability when magic power was infused into the weapon. They were no groundbreaking enchantments by any means, but they would probably suffice to grind his skills a little, once he finally got the chance again. The biggest discovery was probably from a battered and unassuming red gold-colored bracer that looked like it was made of bronze. The item itself was too damaged to count as more than scrap. But the material that appeared in his catalog was interesting. Ancient bronze, crafting material. Unique. Made with a lost technique by the people of Ivisor. This metal, called bronze because of its color, has a durability similar to steel and a magic conductivity comparable to mithril. A special metal created by an ancient civilization sounded very mystifying. And its properties were quite intriguing. When he talked to Finn about it, she explained it. It actually just meant that there was no sentient being left that knew how to do it, during the time the system gained influence on this world. That was why it was lost. Seth soon got bored of fiddling with their spoils. He could not test anything on the boat. On the third day, they had finally left the desert completely behind and came closer to their destination. The air became more humid and the river had noticeably broadened. Ding! Skill, Observation Leave 2 has become Observation Leave 3. Finally. Seth had kept using observation on all the creatures he had dared to, but observe never leveled up. After a talk with Finn, Seth understood that observation was actually a hard to train and not very rewarding skill. Your own level had more impact on the effect of the skill than the skill level itself. Coupled with the fact that it needed exponentially more effort to level and was easily detectable, meant that few people put much effort into it. Lately, animals had started appearing in the river. There were all kinds of hoofed animals with strong or dangerous-looking horns that appeared at the banks of the river. They really demotivated the idea to leave the boat. In the water were creatures resembling crocodiles, but they were rather small and their levels were very low. They were no better than regular animals and posed no threat to the boat. Bored as he was, he used his leisure time to observe the animals in the water and on the shore. The river had widened so much it turned similar to a vast marshland as they neared Syke. And finally, their enjoyably monotonous journey was interrupted when his eyes wandered over the water surface and Magna Buzza Leave 27. Health, 950/1000. Mana, 5/10. Status, Hungry. Title, Man-Eater. Name, None. Sex, Male. This was the highest level he had seen in the last days. He definitely saw more with the new level of observation, even so, it was not that helpful, except knowing mana and health before attacking it. But where was this thing? Seth was wide awake and looked closer at the water surface. There were two fleshy nostrils peeking from the water. Finn! Finn! Wake up! Our boat might be in trouble. Nay, just, the fairy started to fall asleep again. What surfaced from the water in front of them was a hippo. No, more like the disgruntled oversized bloodthirsty ancestor with a mean craving for human meat. Chapter 47. Syke. Magna Buzzy, a monster resembling a hippopotamus the size of an elephant and additional teeth like a crocodile. Such a beast lifted its head out of the water in front of Seth and Finn little boaty. And it was hungry for human meat. Finn, he grabbed the little squishy fairy in his fist and started shaking and spinning her around to wake her up. Pug! I am awake, stop shaking me, she screamed in desperation. Look! He pointed the little fairy towards the beast nearing them. And just in this moment the gigantic hippo that had already opened its gigantic maws as it charged towards them vanished. Two even bigger jaws had suddenly emerged without any previous indication and pulled the giant underwater. Soon the water turned crimson from huge amounts of blood rising to the surface. Seth paled. Finn wailed. And there was no shore to be seen. Only water and reeds. Even so, Finn was a whopping leave 48 fairy now. She was also just a fairy. The little brute would have already been hard-pressed to deal with the Magna Buzzy. How were they supposed to survive against something that just ate it? Ding! Passive skill, Fear Resistance has become leave 8. Fear resistance leveled up and calm reaction kicked in. Seth hurriedly checked the map. Let us calm down. We are not far from Shike, and whatever that was, it has eaten. Everyone knows, after a big meal come a good nap, right? So, we should maybe, very quietly, start paddling and get there as fast as possible? Yes, he whispered to his fairy companion. Finn nodded in agreement, and they carefully and as fast as possible crossed the remaining distance. Soon they could see the first signs of civilization. Groups of run-down shacks on floating platforms and stilts started to appear here and there in the marshland. They grew in number until the broad river they traveled on until now was bordered by a kind of slums. These huts made of wood and reed seemed old and abandoned, judging by the level of disrepair. Mold grew everywhere and the stench of rot filled the humid air. They did not see a single person, which intensified the unsettling atmosphere of this place. Fortunately, they soon left behind these rotting slums. The marshland receded and made for dry land. More normal huts could be seen among fields and lush vegetation on the resurfacing shores of the river. Although the people looked poor and malnourished, they could finally make out some normal people in the vicinity. They could be seen working on the fields and plantations. This sight calmed their hearts a little, since it was a sign of relative safety. And soon they saw it. Before them reached a gigantic whitewashed city wall into the skies. It formed a big bridge with several big gates over the main river. These portcullises of different sizes made it possible to regulate the entrance to the city, while letting the river flow mostly unhindered. This structure spoke of glory, might and wealth. Or that's what it would have during its heyday. The wall looked abandoned and desolate. Many parts had crumpled away and were never repaired. Moss and vines covered much of the wall, with what could be seen having a tint of green tainting the once whitewashed structure. Only few portcullises seemed to be still functional. Disturbingly, the bigger ones had their metal grills smashed in, with what was left becoming twisted scrap peeking out of the river. Using one of these smashed gateways, Bodhi entered Shike. The banks of the river were fortified by sturdy walls on both sides, the only things that looked mildly maintained. The city they entered looked like it was once a beautiful, a vibrant hub of life and commerce. But like the walls outside, it now appeared dreary, empty, and lifeless. Few small vessels were tied to the quay wall restricting the river. The architecture of the city looked magnificent and exquisite, despite the desolate state it was in. However, it was probably never as luxuriant as Ivisor in its prime. We should look for the guild, I guess, Finn suggested as they entered a network of narrow streets and meandering alleys you would not expect from just seeing the city's skyline. They promptly lost their way in the confusing maze of dark alleys. It was silent and empty. There were no people they could have asked for the way. Well, look what we have here. Did you lose your way, my friend? A voice echoed from the shadows they had just passed. Stepping out from the darkness was not a human, but a kind of lizard man. His face looked almost normal, except for his eyes and small patches of scales. Same applied for other parts like his hand, not covered by his dark and worn leather attire. His reptilian eyes twitched when Seth instinctively used observation on him. Name, Asso. Title, Twilight Walker. Age 17. Level, 15. Race, Reptilian. Sex, Male. Affiliation, Adventurers Guild. Health, 970/1000. Mana, 50/74. Despite looking like a generic robber, Asso was actually an adventurer. Still, Seth kept his guard up. To his surprise, Asso did not use observation on him. Quite cheeky to just look at someone else's status, aren't we? Asso will forgive you this time. How did you get behind us? Finn asked, agitated. It was one thing for Seth not to register anything, but for her to be sneaked up onto was different. She had a fairly high level. Low-level stealth would not work on her, even without the perception attribute. The other opened his arms, showing his unarmed hands, and shrugged. Asso is a very good sneaker. Very stealthy. How would a little fairy see us, hidden in the twilight? Anyways, he clapped his hands together, I watched you wandering around in this old district and wondered if you lost your way? This place has been abandoned for a long time, there is nothing to see. Seth examined Asso from head to toe before answering. The guild? That is easy. Let this Asso help get to the main district. There you will find the guild, the inns, and anything else you might be looking for, the lizardman answered enthusiastically and just stared going. When he saw them not following him, he stopped to wave at them. Come on. Seth told Finn what he knew and they judged that Asso was not really a threat. Thus, they followed their scaly guide through the winding alleys of Zhike. Chapter 48. Zhike 2. The change was like a completely different word. Like breaking through the water surface after a long dive or seeing the light of day after wandering through dark caves. Before them lay spacious streets bathed in the bright light of the sun. See. Asso did not lie to you. Asso told you he would bring you here, the lizardman said jovial and turned around. His eyes squinted and a faint golden glow came from his eyes. With a deep voice he continued. And now we are at the point, when I ask you for my reward, he suddenly spoke in first person. Seth heard a shuffle behind them. 2 burly beastmen stepped out from the shadows. One had the face and eyes of a frog, the other looked amphibious too, but Seth could not categorize it. If you would kindly bring out all your items, I would be much obliged. Haha, look at the hope slowly dimming from your eyes. Do not worry, I do not intend to take everything. I just want the... Thwump. While Seth's bare fist had found its way into Asso's face with a satisfying crunch, the fairy had already dispatched the frog and was occupied with pummeling the last one into submission. She flew around the burly and thick-skinned beastman like a sentient bullet and kept battering him. Seth on the other hand stepped out onto the brightly lit street, where Asso had fallen after taking his surprise attack. The lizardman was writhing on the ground, holding his face in pain. He never expected this human to be this strong. Or fast. You hit me. Just like that, he whimpered. With his agility as a lizardman, no human in the same level range should be able to hit him. Seth stood over him cracking his knuckles. This brat was quite cocky. You didn't even let me fight. A vicious punch to the gut made Asso shut up. The poor would-be robber whimpered and shrunk into a fetal position, holding his stomach. Stop whining so much. You barely lost health, Seth said, rolling his eyes as he kicked his opponent on the ground in the back. Asso was quite tough, he still had 75% of his health. But the pain really got to him. Tears fell from his eyes and he even fell back to talking in third person. Please. Please stop. Asso meant no harm. Asso it was a joke. Yes. A joke, another hit shaved 5% off his health for the lame excuse. Even without deliberately aiming his punches, the strength behind Seth's fist could not be underestimated. Oh please, do you think I'm stupid? Who would believe your bullshit now? I gave you an honest chance not to turn out to be a robber. You missed it, he said in a deliberately cold voice. Seth felt no mercy for the opponent looking like a picture of misery. He would pummel him until he could not move anymore and drag him to the guild. That would teach him not to. Please stop, he heard a young voice as he kept pounding Asso into the ground. Seth looked up to see a young lady in rather formal attire run up to them. Her blonde hair was bound into a loose bun and she wore something that reminded Seth of an office suit with a straight skirt, white blouse and a waist jacket. She looked quite out of place in the current setting of an oasis desert city. The street had been calm but not empty. She was the first to care about the situation, other passerbys had ignored Seth and Asso until now. Seeing Seth letting off form Asso, she sped up to reach them. Asso, are you okay? She said out of breath. She crouched down and held his face in her hands, tapping it lightly to make him regain consciousness. So, she knew him. And here Seth thought there were actually upright people in this world who would interfere with violence out of a sense for justice. Asso still had more than half of his health, he would not die anytime soon. So? Care to explain why you interfered? Seth asked monotone. His opinion of her had already fallen a little, after he realized that she knew the robber. When Asso showed sign of being awake, the woman stood up again. She took a confident stance to show authority. Sir. I do not know what happened between the two of you, but the guild will not stand by when adventurers are attacked in public. But if you follow me to the guild, I'm sure we can find a solution. She said in an authoritative tone. She knew that she had no idea and did not even bother asking what happened, but immediately started throwing around the weight of the guild. It sounded like she had already made up her mind. Seth felt peeved, being treated as if he was the offender here. He took a deep breath. The scary strong man taking a deep breath gave her confidence. As long as she mentioned the guild, she could defuse the situation and they could settle everything in a calm manner at the guild. Asso sometimes made trouble, but he normally was a good guy. She was sure they could. I see how it is, Seth said in an alarmingly calm manner and proceeded to give Asso a kick, catapulting him across the street, where he crashed against the wall of a house. It looked gruesome, but he barely lost any health from it. Time to play this up. Finn had described the guild in a better light, but to think they would not only shield criminals, but even try to cover up their crimes and threaten the victims. The young woman covered her mouth in shock upon Seth's reaction. This was not what she had meant to do at all. But the words were stuck in her throat as he continued. I had planned to show mercy and drag him to the guild. But if this is the guild's stance, I will take it upon myself to make sure he harms no one else in this life. No, please wait. That's not at all what I meant to say, the woman said desperately. Seth? Fuck is going on here? Finn had finally joined the scene. She had dragged the two burly guys to the edge of the alley and came flying over when she saw Seth arguing with someone. Oh, this lady just said that the guild wishes to shield our attacker and if we talk, they will get rid of us, Seth told Finn nonchalant. He winked at her and kept slowly going towards the gasping Asso. No. That is not what I said. And also, not what I meant. This is all a misunderstanding. Please stop, the young woman fell in a panic and was starting to cry, distraught with worry. She had just recently managed to get a job as receptionist at the guild. And now she had caused a scene. They would totally fire her. She could not lose another job. She sat down and tears started flowing uncontrollably. Looking at the young girl starting to sob, Finn made a decision. In this rare circumstance, Finn, the happy-go-lucky fairy brute, saw herself forced to be the voice of reason. Okay. All right. Everyone calms down. Seth. Stop menacingly going towards that poor sob just to teach her a lesson. This girl is already close to a mental breakdown. Looking at the battered Asso on the ground and the picture of misery that was the young lady, he shrugged and let it go. Both seemed to have learned their lesson. The woman looked back and forth between the scary strong man and the little fairy, teaching a lesson? So, this was all a joke. Seth scowled at her. It's not a joke. Don't go around making assumptions, without asking about the situation first. She shrunk back and nodded meekly. Still, she calmed down considerably after understanding that Seth had not been serious. Finn explained the situation to the girl who introduced herself as Mary, and showed her the two guys from the alley. They were members of Asso's party. The girl still could not understand why Asso would do something like this. As a promising D-rank adventurer he had few needs, but she decided that this was not for her to judge. Dragging the three stooges over the street, Seth and Finn followed Mary to the guild, located in the commercial district of the city. The streets changed and there were some more people here, but still not so many that one would start calling it lively. Shops and restaurants lined the sides of the road, but many shop windows and dining rooms were closed and empty. They finally reached the guild. The guild hall of Hike was a lot bigger than what they saw in Ivisor, but looked almost as run down, if not worse. Many windows were broken and boarded up. The facade was covered in graffiti and showed sign of disrepair. Didn't the log call this the regional headquarters or something? Why was it in this state? Looking at this, Seth felt like his sarcastic assumption could be real. Maybe this guild had to rob people to stay alive. The inside was no better. The floors were littered with all kinds of rubbish from dirt to kitchen scraps of the bar/eatery to the right. Nobody cared to clean the entrance hall anymore. The furniture and reception counter were worn down and scratched up. The chairs' tables looked like they were barely holding together, even without someone sitting on them. Mary, you are late. What is this? A strong female voice broke the silence of the entrance hall. A woman in the same attire as Mary came from behind the counters. She looked a lot stricter. Her hair was in a firm bun and her triangular glasses emphasized her sharp eyes. She stalked as her gaze fell on Mary's weird company, of which three were beaten up and unconscious. Chapter 49. Hike 3. After a small introduction, Seth, Finn, Mary, Asso, and the secretary of the former guild master and head receptionist, Olivia, were all sitting in a big meeting room of the guild hall. The room was not dirty, but you could see the lack of care it experienced over the years. What it lacked in maintenance was made up in hospitality. Seth and Finn were settled with a hot cup of tea and a plate of sugary pastry native to Hike. It contained very sweet honey and tasted quite succulent. The tea's strong taste matched it well and calmed Seth's mood considerably. Asso had been treated by a guild healer. He still looked miserable, but he was awake and could talk normally. Olivia glared at the beastman after hearing what had happened from Seth. Mary was not better off, she knew she had not handled the situation correctly. Both hung their head in shame under Olivia's sharp eyes. Explain, she barked at Aso, who looked like a depressed puppy in this moment. It all started with the reason why Aso even managed to become a promising adventurer to begin with. He had a unique skill called Golden Opportunity. This skill allowed him to see items and materials that could help him become stronger by purifying his bloodline. As a reptilian he had the chance to rank up his bloodline all the way to Draconian if he was lucky and got the right opportunities. The benefits of this were obvious: stronger attribute growth and greater multipliers. Aso's mission was initially really to patrol the old district and help people who had lost their way. However, when he wanted to approach Seth and the fairy Golden Opportunity showed the young traveler in a golden hue. He had either something on his body or in his inventory that might be of great help to his promotion. Seth lifted an eyebrow at this statement. What could he have, that could help this guy promote? So Aso talked to his party before talking to travelers. He had planned to bring them to the edge of the old district and intimidate them there. Once they emptied their inventory, he would have been able to discern what the item was and either explain the situation if he could pay for it, or run off with it if it was too valuable. He was confident in his agility. He looked almost smug when he mentioned that plain robbery was not his first choice. Just how did this guy grow up to think his actions were appropriate? At least it did not seem like he used violence at any point in time before. Aso knew about observation, but as a beastman he lacked the talent in magic to acquire it. And since his level was not considered high, he also had no skills to compensate for this lack, yet. So, he had severely underestimated the two travelers and got his butt handed to him. And now Aso even had to pay the guild healer for treatment. When his report turned into random rambling, Olivia told him to shut up. She had heard enough. This guy had pulled off stunts like this before, but it was the first time Olivia could force him to talk about his reasons. Normally these incidents ended with the first option. People got a scare and then sold him whatever trinket or item he wanted. It did not really impact his reputation since he paid well and the people happily forgot the scare. How far has this city sunken, that a D rank can act like this, Olivia thought, shaking her head. Aso is clearly in the wrong. He and his party will pay 5 gold as reparations. At the same time, their dungeon license will be suspended and they will have to do menial quest for 6 months. She looked to Seth, but her eyes stayed on Finn. Is this punishment acceptable to you? Finn and Seth just nodded. They did not really care about this anymore. Seth was more interested in the thing Aso wanted. On another note, I hope you can forgive Mary her misconduct. She is still new and inexperienced. Mary twitched when her name was mentioned, but looked up when Olivia actually spoke in her favor. Finn thinks she has learned her lesson, the fairy answered while Seth's eyes stayed on Aso. Aso, he said, which made the lizardman wince. Aso is. I am very sorry for what happened. Please forgive me. Yet. Calm down, Seth waved his hand, I'm more interested in the material you saw with Golden Opportunity. Seth had just come to this world and people already wanted to rob stuff from him, he did not even know he had. Let us meet later and look through my inventory. Maybe I will still sell you what you need, if the price is right, Seth said with a twinkle in his eyes. With this, Olive concluded the meeting and asked Mary and Aso to leave. Soon only Olivia and Seth's party were left in the room. Olivia turned to the innocent-looking fairy. Now then, what else can I do for the B-rank adventurer Finn Bellsmiter? I have heard about you. Our guild already looks like this. I hope you don't plan to go on a drunken rampage like in. Lies. Stop slandering Finn in front of Seth. Finn is an upstanding member of society. Finn never demolished a bar, she cried out, waving her tiny fists with a crimson-red face. So, Finn had a past like this, hey, he thought and chuckled upon the image of tiny Finn being drunk and starting a bar fight. Seth obviously knew Finn had been an adventurer before, she had mentioned it in Ivisor, but had not further talked much about it. Anyways, we actually came to the guild for 2 reasons. I want to join the guild and we picked this up in Ivisor, he pulled out the logbook from his inventory. Ivisor? You actually came out of Cursed Ruins alive. Shock was written all over Olivia's face. Even when this young man was really an Orihuma and Finn was a B-rank adventurer, it was incredible they made it out of there. Nobody had ever returned from there. Yes, barely. Without the hints from this book, we might have died without knowing what killed us. Now that the conversation was finally on the book, Seth described what happened in Ivisor and their escape from the ruins without going into too deep of a detail. As if the earlier shock was not enough, Olivia lost control over her expression, as Seth told her the story. He told Olivia about the quest and gave her the book, but the quest did not react. That is weird, didn't we hand it over like the quest told us to? Seth asked puzzled. Olivia had a complicated expression after hearing his question. I don't know how to tell you this, but maybe you have to talk to and give this book to the guild master. The problem is that the guild master stopped caring about his job after this incident in Ivisor. She had not been here at the time, so she could only give a rough explanation. 10 years ago, this guild branch was the headquarters of the region. With many strong adventurers, they kept the creatures of the marshlands at bay, and the materials also brought prosperity to Zhike. But something terrible happened and the Ivisor branch stopped responding. The guild master sent a contingent with most of the high-ranking members of the guild to subjugate the threat, but all of them vanished in those ruins. Having lost the forces that culled the creatures in the surrounding area was one of the reasons Zhike had lost most of its glory. The guild master blamed himself for this and was reprimanded on top of this. When she joined the guild, the master was only coming sporadically to the guild hall. This neglect caused new promising adventurers to leave. The branch had lost its standing and was degraded. Lately the guild master only held this role in name, but seldomly showed up in the guild. Like this, only Olivia was left to lead what was left of the guild. So, you might have to go and look for the guild master to complete your quest. I am sorry, she said and gave Seth the book back. Seth sighed, of course it could not be easy for once. It's not your fault, I guess. But I can still register here, right? Seth tried to stay motivated. The quest could wait. He still had lots of things to do. Chapter 50. Becoming an adventurer. Seth had talked about this with Finn in detail. He had opened up to the fairy about his class and needs during their leisure time on Bodhi. Finn had been very surprised that Seth actually had a unique production class, but did not say much else about it. They had concentrated on his options from here on. As a registered adventurer he could enter dungeons to level up and gather materials. It also made travel easier since locals often held a higher opinion of an adventurer than people from other system institutions. They now even had the option to find a guard quest with the guild if Seth could not find a way to travel to Aura with money alone. He could also enter dungeons to level up without much risk to his life. Finn reassured him that being a member of the guild was not against his contract with the church, as the guild normally did not interfere much with their adventurers. The guild registration was rather uncomplicated. Olivia had left the room after their request to join and came back holding a plate with a crystal ball set in it. This device could check Seth's status, to make sure he was not a wanted criminal. After seeing Finn not really reacting to his unique class, they had talked about it. Unique classes did not seem to be uncommon enough to spark a big sensation. Hearing this, Seth had fewer doubts about showing it here. Seth had to put his hand on the brass plate and the device showed his status and the name of his class in a system-like window, but none of his skills. Olivia was mildly surprised about his class rating but did not further talk about it. Next came the talk about what rank Seth would start at. He had the strength to easily beat up a D rank, but strength was not all one needed to rank up. There was also reputation, but this was covered by Finn vouching for Seth. And so, he became a C rank adventurer. Once again, Seth had to put his hands on the plate. The small machine started vibrating and he felt a slight burn on his wrist. A small tattoo had appeared there. It was in the shape of a small shield icon and built the connection to the guild. Next, the device started rattling and spit out a small ivory plate with all the essential information printed on it. This device did not just check the status, but also printed the license. Truly fascinating. And just like this, he had become an adventurer. Olivia left the two alone in the meeting room to go and collect their 5 gold from Aso's party. They used the time to talk about their plans from now on. A lot had cropped up and they might have to stay some time in Zhike, which meant they needed an inn. After some talk, they decided to split up once they had an inn. Finn would go around town looking for a way to travel to Aura and for information about the guild master. The fairy had experience traveling in other worlds and could take care of herself in a foreign city. Seth on the other hand planned to exploit Aso as a guide to get around. After finding out what the reptile needed from him, he would use it to make him his guide. Seth wanted to find a hunter to finally dismantle the juvenile. Then he would go and cash in the promissory stone at the bank and give the shops and market here a visit. This town looked like it had to have a bazaar, and even if this was not Aura, maybe he could find some useful stuff there. And depending on how long Finn would take with her tasks, he would find a place to use his smithy. He really needed to repair his armor. They were done talking and devoured the leftover pastries until Olivia returned with their money. Before it was time to leave, they used this chance to ask her about any good inns in town and the dungeons the guild supervised. It turned out that Zhike had 3 dungeons. The guild headquarters were originally located here, because of the business with monster material from the surrounding marshland, not because of the number of dungeons. The first one was somewhat of a mystery. It was a deep round shaft that went straight into the ground with a maze of tunnels spreading off from it in the outskirts of the city. It had always been there and nobody really knew its purpose anymore. But at some point, generic low-level undead started spawning from it. They ranged from level 5 to level 10 on average, and it was an optimal beginner dungeon. Getting lost in the maze was actually the biggest danger. The description sounded very mysterious and Seth really wanted to see it, even if it was just for sightseeing. The second was the neglected sewer system of Zhike, also a beginner dungeon with slimes and rats up to level 15. Wasn't it a cliché for a dungeon to be in the sewers? But it made sense. Dungeons grew everywhere like mold, as Finn had described it. Seth had no inclination to go even near that one, and Finn had enough of bad smells, too, after her little adventure in the Kraken. The last one was the ruin of a noble's residence, that was lost to the marshlands. The last time someone came back from there, it was reported to spawn a variation of Naga with level 25 as a minimum and a mix of the beasts from the marshlands. It was the most dangerous and there was currently no party able to safely go there. It sounded wet. Seth had enough of wet, or dry for that matter. Who would have thought he would start to miss the forest? Not. What Seth missed were the endearingly yellow clouds of smog, the acidic rain falling on bleak asphalt streets on a cold Sunday afternoon. A landscape filled with dreary and colorless high-risers that stood like tombstones on the grave of nature. Seth started to feel a little homesick. Anyways, after asking for the direction, they finally left the rundown guild. Seth found Asso waiting right outside the guild hall. He looked a lot better already. Seth had been treated by Finn after that night, so he knew that the magic healers truly were a cheat. "You told me that you might still help me. Did you mean it?" he asked warily. Being totally cool when interacting with the guy who had just beat the living daylights out of, might have been asking for too much. "Perfect, now I don't have to look for you. You can follow us for now," Seth said, smiling, and the 3 of them went to find the inn Olivia had told them about. It was some streets away from the guild. The location looked a lot better and the inn seemed decent. The first floor was a big eatery with a lot of guests. A good sign. The food smelled great and made Seth's mouth water. A satisfying meal. How long had it been? At the bar was manned by a big burly dude with a fabulous mustache. The sleeves of his shirt were rolled up, showing big hairy forearms that could rival Popeye. "What can I do for you?" he asked with a booming, friendly voice, when the 3 came before the bar. "Bear," was Seth's first thought when he saw him. He looked like a big, friendly, hairy bear. Seth realized that he was staring at the man and awkwardly answered. Yes. "Do you maybe have a vacant room for us?" he gestured between Finn and himself. Another participant of the conversation suddenly rose to speak. Seth's stomach audibly overpowered the bustling dining hall and demanded its due. "And whatever you recommend from your menu," Seth added with a red face. The burly man just smiled knowingly. "Haha, of course. Today's special is snake soup and fried cowcula bird. The room is 6 silver a day. It comes with access to the bath and 3 meals a day for both of you. How long will you stay?" 6 silver seemed expensive, but Seth did not care. The food looked good and offering a bath sold it for him. He gave the man 24 silver for 4 days and explained that they might prolong their stay. "Very well. My name is Harmond. Here is the key to your room. Do you eat here, or should I send to your room?" The 3 sat down at one of the tables and ate in silence. Asso felt weird at first, but the meal tasted as good as it smelled and he soon relaxed. Seth and Finn split up in front of the inn when they left. Finn flew off into the city, leaving Seth and Asso behind. "Alright then, Asso. How do we do this? Should I just take out everything in my inventory one by one? Or can you tell me roughly what you are looking for?" It was the first time he spoke to him since they left the guild. The lizardman felt a little calmer interacting with Seth after they had a meal together. Unfortunately, he could not possibly know what golden opportunity reacted to, until he saw it. We should first find an appropriate place. I have a hunch what it might be, but this place is not suited to take it out. You don't coincidentally know where I can find Hunter here? One who can dismantle big game, Seth led the conversation. He had no idea whether it was really the giant snake Aso was reacting to, or not. But he needed to find a hunter anyway. Oh yes. I actually know someone who can do that. He has a shop no too far away from the old district. He actually knew someone. They had also asked Olivia, but she did not know anyone. It had been a long time since anyone needed a big game to be dismantled by a professional. Perfect. Oh, but can you bring me to the system bank first? I have to take care of something there first, Seth said with a friendly smile. The other nodded happily and led the way. Seeing Aso so eager to help, made Seth almost feel bad for exploiting him as a tour guide. Almost. Business at the bank seemed complicated at first but became a lot easier when they found out that he was an Orihuma affiliated with the church. That totally was the reason they treated him like a VIP and not the promissory stone over 650 gold. In record time Seth had opened a bank account with 700 gold credit, was given a VIP crystal card, and had an additional 50 gold stored in his inventory. He was treated with a lot of smiles, tea, cookies, and compliments until he left the door. Money really changed how people treated you. Aso had waited outside and could only look baffled at the bank manager waving after the leaving Seth. What did you do to them? I am rich, bitch. What else is there to say? Now that Seth had some cash and a credit card, it was time for business. Chapter 51. Grumpy Hunter? Seth and Aso were at the border to the old district. He really had not missed these dark and damp alleyways that formed a confusing maze. Why would anyone open a shop in this place? He asked, not really expecting an answer, but still got one. The land is cheap here, I guess? This was once the most vital place of the city, you know? Wares and supplies would all via the river into the city. So many shops and jobs were located here and people lived here. There really was nothing else to do, so Seth listened to Aso rambling on about the city. After the city lost the support of the adventurers, their troops were not enough to keep the marshland creatures at bay. Aso was still small when the bigger gates were destroyed by a giant beast. It and the horde following it had rampaged along the river and many people died. Among them Aso's parents. After the gates were open once, things kept happening. People kept vanishing in the night and corpses were found in the contorted streets of the old district. The place was too convoluted for guards to be effective, so they were pulled out completely. Most people left for other cities, as life here was not safe anymore. Now only criminals, the poor and the stingy still lived here. As if he had perfectly timed it, they arrived at a big double door when his story ended. It was a big warehouse close to the river. Aso just walked in without knocking. He must know the hunter well. Behind the door was a big empty storage space with bare walls and the floor covered in stone tiles. Seth estimated it to be 20m long and 6m wide, so it would probably fit the juvenile. Yudrid. You in? I have a customer for you, Aso opened a door and yelled. A grumpy grunting came back as the answer. What stepped through that door was a 130 centimeters tall ball of bad mood. A long messy beard fell on a rusty chainmail and the dirty leather shirt and pants he wore below it. He scratched his head covered in long, matted, blonde hair, while his other hand was busy lifting an almost empty wine bottle to his mouth. That him, a wine bottle was pointed at Seth. The voice did not fit the appearance. It was a rough voice yet, but it was definitely the deep voice of a woman. Looking closer at her, the skin beyond the beard and dirt looked smooth and while almost indiscernible, under the chainmail and leather, there were 2 bulges on her chest. A female dwarf, he blurted out. Ha, a real bright spark, your friend here, the dwarf laughed and shoved her hand toward him. Wore a shake, Yudrid Dimblad, the best damn hunter in this shithole of a city. You got something for me to dismantle? Something by gee I hope, she winked at him. Seth felt a little unsettled by the wink, but tried to ignore it. You gonna take it out, or should I help you, she urged Seth, while Aso could only facepalm in the background. Seth shrugged and took the juvenile out from his inventory. Ho ho. It's been a long time, since someone pulled out such a long schlong in front of me, she grinned about her own dirty joke and her white teeth sparkled in comparison to her dirty exterior. As drunk as she had acted until now, she became a professional when the snake came out. Her movements became firm and controlled. He walked over to a wall and flipped a switch upon which the storage room immediately started cooling down. She started walking up and down the juvenile's boy to inspect it. Aso on the other hand was euphoric. From his eyes flashing in a bright gold, Seth concluded that his guess was right and the reptilian needed something from Seth's giant reptile. Yudrid soon came back after she walked around the juvenile once. Quite the bugger you have here. You didn't catch this thing in the marshlands, I fathom. The drunk slur in her speech was gone completely. Had she just been playing that? Nope. Yudrid pondered a little and nodded. So, what do you want from me? Should I dismantle it completely? Or do you just want a specific part? She too looked at Aso's brightly sparkling eyes. Did she maybe misunderstand him? Everything. I don't know what exactly is a valuable crafting material on this snake, so I did not want to loot it. She told Seth to come back tomorrow evening. She would be done by then. She asked for 2 gold to dismantle the whole snake and 50 silver extra for doing it immediately. As the rich fancy pants Seth had become, he easily agreed on the price. Yudrid had mentioned some of the valuable crafting material like the ribs and Seth could not wait to see what he could do with them. Aso could only hope that the thing he needed was not a crafting material. Aso had understood that he had become a glorified tour guide for Seth and accepted this role. Their next stop would have been the commercial district, but it was getting late, so Seth wanted to return to the inn. He met there with the fairy, who was already happily eating dinner. Aso said goodbye and left. He would be back in the morning. Seth sat down beside Finn and also got his meal. Back in their room after filling their bellies, they talked about their day. The fairy had visited a few different bars and found some information brokers. After looping some gears, she found a few different ways to get to Aura from here. The longest one was to take a trade route to the seaport of Oricode and take the ocean route to a port near Aura. It was not cheap, but they could relax for the whole journey. The second longest one was to join a caravan that would bring them across the desert and thought the mountains via dwarven tunnels. It was the cheapest, as they could join as guards and even get paid for the journey. The fastest and most expensive one was the airship. A magical flying vehicle they could enter in Oricode. Similar to the ocean route, it roughly followed the coastline and visited port cities. Unlike the ocean route, it would turn inland after crossing the desert and actually halt in Aura once. It was the most fitting, but with 25 gold for a commoner class ticket it was also very pricey. The most unreliable option was to ask the system church to send them via the pathwork. It was fast, it was cheap, but who knew where those quacks transported them? She had a little less luck concerning the guild master, but she would focus on him tomorrow. After Seth had told her about his day and she had a good laugh about Yudrid's sexual innuendos, they both returned to their room. While Find fell in the bed right away, Seth decided to give this bath a visit. He could really use one. The bath he entered was actually something like a shared bathhouse. He just followed the instructions, put his clothes in his inventory and entered just wearing a towel. Seth properly washed himself with soap before entering a big hot spring-style bath. "Well, look who's finally here," a familiar voice greeted him. In the hot spring, just wearing a towel and scarring the world with the sight of his giant bush of silvery white chest hair, sat Simon. Chapter 52. The Bazaar. Simon. The priest hurriedly blocked the fist of justice aiming for his face. In further consequence he had stood up and his towel unraveled a little, threatening to deal tremendous psychological damage to Seth, if the towel were to slip any further. "Please wait, Seth. Calm down. Neither of us want this towel to slip down." This blatant threat stopped Seth in his tracks. Right, if that towel fell, it would be a whole other kind of personal apocalypse for Seth. He took a deep breath and let go of his anger. "What are you doing here, Simon? Was it not enough to throw me into the desert and almost kill me? Are you here to gloat? Don't be like that, Seth. I came to see if you are okay," Simon explained cordially. Why, Seth didn't believe him. Can't I be worried about our newest lay follower, now with some sweat on his bald forehead? Why? Simon rolled his eyes and gave up. Okay. The fair folk are pressuring us to make sure you and your little companion are alive and healthy. Happy? Look, I could not have changed this, even if I wanted to. The effect is built in when a native travels through the pathwork. It's the interference of our god. Even Simon the happy old man, looked down at this moment. Seth didn't know whether he was acting or it really burdened the priest, but it wasn't important now. Whatever happened, happened. Seth sank down into the warm water and let his worries wash away. Silence ensued. "And why didn't you tell me beforehand?" Seth finally asked after some time. "It's church policy not to talk about it, at least not the first time. And when the fairy joined you, I even wanted to tell you, but you just ran off, he answered in a melancholic voice. It seemed that the old priest had really taken a liking to Seth in the short time they knew each other. Seth sighed. All right. I forgive you, but this is your last chance. Was this all you came here for? He tried to hide it, but the old man's wet beard shook in joy. Simon stood up abruptly, which brought his towel dangerously close to slipping again. Calm reaction kicked in and Seth averted his eyes in time, before the elder bent over and started rummaging in at the border of the bath. When Simon finally sat back down, he held a rough dark stone in his hands. A complicated rune was engraved on it. Here, this is a teleport rune, I got it from the church here. It's the physical manifestation of a system right you will gain at level 60. It is only a one-off item, but if you are in life-threatening danger, this can transport your party back here to the church in Shike. You just have to put some mana into it and it will activate. Seth took the heavy stone, the size of a palm from Simon. As he was examining it, the priest suddenly reminded him. Oh, and don't put it in your inventory. It will vanish in your inventory if you don't have the corresponding level to own it. Seth nodded to signal that he had understood. The two still sat in the bath for some time and Seth recounted their adventures after coming to this new world, accompanied by Simon's gasps of shock and laughter. Well then, Seth. I have to leave now. I wish you better luck on your future journey. With this Simon stood up, this time he held tightly onto the towel, and left. Seth soon followed and went to his room to sleep. It was already late. Seth woke up from small kicks in the face. The fairy lay sprawled on the pillow, twitching in her sleep. For a second he imagined doing to her what his alarm clock had experienced, but her cute sleeping expression soothed his ire. His stomach gave a motivating speech and Seth left for breakfast after getting dresses in a fresh set of clothes. Finn soon joined him and they had a delightful breakfast together. Asso was already waiting outside when Finn and Seth left the inn. Finn split off to go and find information about the guildmaster, leaving Asso and Seth behind. Yudrid had said to come back in the evening, so they still had a lot of time. He planned to spend visiting the commercial district. Even if he did not buy anything, he could further fill his material catalog. Maybe even gain some blueprints? Seth still did not know a lot about blueprints. It had leveled up once, but never since. Except for pumping in SP, he had no idea what the conditions of why it leveled up in the first place. This reminded him of his idea to find a library. In civilization that got used to the system's influence, books about these details should exist. Finding a bookshop or library became another point on his checklist. Seth didn't know what he had expected from this rundown city's commercial district, but he was definitely disappointed. Most of the shops they passed were closed and boarded up. No bookshops or anything of the kind, and the few weapon and armor shops they found were in no way better than what Claude's, rather they were worse. Many of the weapons were not even new, but second-hand, badly maintained or damaged. Even the few good weapon made of high-quality steel were worse than what Seth made with medium iron. The only benefit he got from the shops was the recipe for high-quality steel. It came to a surprise to Seth, that he needed iron and coal in his smelter to make high-quality steel. Until now he had thought it was an advantage, that the soul fire did not need any fuel inside the smelter. At first glance, the bazaar was not much better than the shops. When you think of bazaar, you normally have a big plaza with lots of stalls and a big crowd of people in mind. With vendors screaming around to sell their wares and a huge hustle and bustle of customers. For better or worse, the big plaza was almost barren. Seth had feared the crowd of people and was happy there were only few, but the lack of stalls also lowered his chances to find anything worthwhile. Unexpectedly, he struck it rich when he came across the artifacts stalls. Among the wares, that reminded a lot more of a flea market than artifacts, he actually found some pieces made of ancient bronze. The stall owners did not seem to know that some of their stuff were real artifacts and Seth was able to get them for cheap. Some small trinkets and jewelry like the bracer he found among the stuff from Ivisor, most of them were damaged and only useful to be melted down. A minority showed signs of broken enchantments on them. Maybe he could scan those? He put everything in one of the bags he got from the tailor lady and stored it in his inventory. The bigger surprise came from the ancient weapons the stalls sold. They were in no way in a condition to be used, with most broken or low on durability. But they were exotic enough to give Seth a few new blueprints. Among them was the Kapesh with a distinctive blade that looked like a flattened question mark with the cutting edge on the outside of the curve like a scimitar. A kind of curved dagger with the blade formed like a halved crescent moon and a square spear tip with 4 sharp edges. All of them were made of ancient bronze and showed a pattern like pattern-welded steel. Compared to the little trinkets whose worth the owners did not know, these scrap weapons were totally overpriced, with the vendors asking for several gold coins for an unusable weapon. Seth ended up spending 3 gold on 2 scrap weapons. He really wanted to melt them down and make at least one weapon from ancient bronze to test its properties and see its true potential. Other than these few surprises, there was nothing else to be found on the bazaar. The trip was not completely fruitless, but Seth had expected more. There was also none of those typical game events like running into a disguised noble girl or finding an epic ego item hidden among scrap. He followed Aso, thinking of this kind of nonsense. They were leaving the marketplace when Aso was suddenly shoved to the side by a member of a team of guards surrounding a young man. Seth had spoken too early. Here it was. An encounter with a corrupt and disgusting young moss. "What did you do that for, Nazim?" the guard was reprimanded by the handsome young master. "Yo, young master, I'm just making sure the rabble keeps its distance from you," Nazim said, giving Aso the stink eye. "Stop calling our citizens rabble." He actually gave the guard a bitch slap. "I am sorry for my guard's lack of discipline." The young master actually bowed his head in apology to Aso. "Young Master Ikram, please don't tea. Aso is just a lowly citizen. Master Ikram should not apologize to me," Aso reacted flustered. Seth would have had to be stupid to not understand that this guy was probably the heir of the city lord or some high-ranking noble, but he seemed polite and approachable. He had not forgotten what Claude had taught him and gave the guards a once-over with Blacksmith's eyes. Seth proceeded to take out one of the swords he had tested soul infusion on. They were some of his best works so far and perfect for advertisement. The weapons and armor worn by the guards of a noble should be high quality, right? But even so, the weapons were more or less well maintained. They were no better than what could be bought in the shops around here. Seth smelled business. Was Seth wealthy? He sure felt like he was. Did that mean he would turn away from potential business? Hell no. The guards interrupted Ikram's conversation with Aso and pulled him back into their midst, when they saw the young man pull out a weapon. Aso looked at Seth, puzzled. Why did he suddenly take out a weapon? "Young Master Ikram, a pleasure to meet you. I am Seth, a humble blacksmith. I recently had the chance to visit your..." "Keep your distance, blacksmith," Nazim the distance inspector interrupted him rudely. Seth scowled. "Beautiful city," he continued sarcastically and looked at Nazim's unsheathed blade. "I couldn't help but notice the terrible state that your guard's equipment is in. Don't you think someone of your standing deserves a better prepared force?" "A blacksmith, you say?" Ikram mumbled. There had been no actual blacksmith willing to visit the stick since, he almost inaudibly whispered to himself. "Of course, I have reference works," he said, and held out the sword, with the hilt pointed towards Ikram. "Young master can test it for yourself if you want, or maybe I should help you discipline your guard." Chapter 53. A deal? Ikram smirked at that offer. Where had such a person suddenly come from in these sticks? No blacksmith worth his money had visited Hike since the surrounding had become this dangerous. Not to mention living here. Ikram did the best they could to stabilize the city's situation together with his father the lord, but the surrounding kept becoming more dangerous and regular trade had almost stopped. They could not buy better equipment, even if they had the money to. Yes, go ahead. Nazim, have a spar with this man. Let us see what his wares are worth. If this man could really bring a major improvement, it might be worth getting a loan from the system bank. Nazim unsheathed his scimitar and charged at the young blacksmith, while the young master was deep in thought. He was a Level 30 guard with swordsmanship, adept, Level 9 and stronger than many adventurers currently present at the guild. Nazim has requested a duel. Do you accept? Y/N. Seth accepted and pushed magic power into the sword and its edge glowed in a dim blue light. He barely managed to react to the man's charge and deflected a downward slash. The force behind it made his arm tremble. The enemy's blade had a big gash in it from this impact. Nazim easily recovered the deflected strike and angrily started a barrage of strikes in fast succession. Was this a skill? Seth manages to deflect some and dodge the others as he kept stepping back. Each collision brought another notch in the opponent's weapon, but the other showed no signs of stopping. Although he could keep up in speed and strength, the difference in skill was obvious. This was different from fighting some brainless mobs or cheesing it, this was really dangerous. Nazim did not look like he would leave it at a spar, he was out for blood. Alright. If he wanted a serious fight, he could have it. Seth took some distance from Nazim, baiting him to follow. Suddenly the pale blue soul fire covered his sword and he did horizontal strike in front of the charging Nazim, as if to warn him. The other was surprised by the sudden light and averted his eyes, successfully interrupting his charge. He fixed his eyes on the young man, that kept running and dodging. Again, he charged at him to execute a powerful strike and split him in two halves. Suddenly his charge was interrupted again, he stumbled and fell. A terrible pain flared up from his foot and the side he fell on. Caltrops. The ground was covered in them. When this little, with an angry thought Nazim picked himself up, ready to slaughter Seth. In this moment, a dim blue edge broke the scimitar in his hand and a sharp tip bit into his throat, threatening to take his life, if it went just a little further. Ding! You have won your first duel. Purse +1. You have earned EXP. I guess, I win, Seth said with a smug smile as he saw a whopping 10% increase in experience. You cheated, Nazim scowled and spit on the ground. With the end of the duel all injuries healed. Watching Nazim's wounds heal and the caltrops being pushed out from his flesh made Seth remember the tutorial. He had totally forgotten that you cannot actually die during an official duel. He had fought Sirius for no reason at all. The badly battered scimitar, compared to his still pristine sword, would have been more than enough to prove his point. He did not have to win the duel in the first place. He even fought dirty to win. As Seth was reprimanding himself, he heard a clap echo in the empty marketplace. Very spectacular. Even so, you have a crafting class and did not even cross level 20, you defeated my guard. Despite using some unconventional means, that is truly impressive. Ikram walked over to them and picked up the broken scimitar. The edge was broken and serrated, making it look more like a saw than a blade. This might be worth it, even if they had to get a loan. So, Seth the blacksmith, you have proven the quality of your works. And I am indeed interested in your services. That leaves just one question, what is your price? I think you can tell from the state of this city, but our treasury is not far from empty, he smiled wryly. Even he could not deny that their home was broke. I already have an economic alternative for you, but first, how did you know my level? I didn't feel anyone use observation on me. Oh, Ikram looked puzzled, how come you don't know about it? As the son of the city lord, my class is obviously also city lord. As such I have a skill called Lord's Insight, which tells me the rough information of anyone in my territory. It's common knowledge that most nobles possess this skill, or a similar one. It's similar to appraisal, but specific to people. I see. Seth was baffled. No wonder Finn called observation a low-tier skill. There were skills that did the same, but a lot better. Just not being detected would already be a huge bonus. Seth really needed to find out more about skills and he had the perfect source in front of him. Anyways. Here's the deal, as the Lord you probably have a library, right? Ikram answered with a nod and Seth kept talking, good, I will give you a discount on the weapons, if you provide me a place to stay, access to the library and the material. The first two are easy. But what is the discount worth if we have to purchase the materials first? You don't purchase it. You probably have an armory, right? Just give me all the old weapon, armor and scrap you don't need and I will melt it into the raw materials myself. Deal. Ikram's expression brightened when he heard that Seth could smelt the materials himself, if they provided their old junk. Ikram was honest. They really had a lot of old and broken weapons clogging up the storage rooms and armory. Zhike had often purchased new weapons in its heyday and stored away the old ones. They were forgotten, until they got into a monetary crisis. Weapons often broke after the guards had to take over the subjugation work of the guild. The broken ones were simply stored away until someone got around to deal with them and replaced by old and dusty ones, they fished out from one of the other storage rooms. The current weapons the guards wore were decades old and restored to be barely usable. So Ikram more than readily agreed. Did Seth want to go to Aura? Sure. Was he in a hurry, though? Not really. This was a good chance to grind his skills, why not take it? He just had to explain it to Finn, later. Seth, do you have time right now? If you do, would you come with me to the palace and talk to my father? We need his approval to settle this deal. Seth was free until evening, so he agreed to go to the palace with Ikram. He really wanted to inspect the armory and library. Browsing the collection of a fallen noble powerhouse might yield unexpected results. Chapter 54. Library in Carfunkel. The Lord was not that old, but he looked like a middle-aged as the hardships and worries of the past years had taken their toll. His clothes sat loose as if he had lost a lot of weight and the otherwise dark hair was crossed by grey streaks. Listening to his son explaining Seth's suggestion brought some color back to his face. Seth had no idea what hardships this man had weathered, for a noble and powerful man like him to react as such to a simple offer from a blacksmith. But he did not really care, either. The Lord happily agreed for Seth to plunder their personal armory and storage rooms and peruse their library in exchange for equipping their guards with high-quality equipment. Seth was surprised when he heard that would not need to make several hundred weapons and armors. Their personal troops only amounted to 30 people, whilst Hike's security force had been reduced to 150 guards, by the lack of funds and the constant loss of life in an attempt to cull the marshlands monsters. He was only asked to equip the 30 private guards and some extra. He would get everything he could find in the storage and armory and 150 gold on top for a set of spear, short sword and armor for the 30 personal guards. All of quality comparable to the sword used in the duel. The Lord suggested the armory as the place to set up his smithy, since there was already a room, meant for a smithy and offered for Seth and Finn to live in the palace for the time of their stay. There were many empty rooms, as the palace was built, whence Hike prospered. Afterwards, Ikram brought Seth to visit the armory and the library. The armory was in a dismal state. Rusty, damaged, and badly maintained weapons in all kinds of variations filled the weapon racks. Mostly old blades like swords and sabers were left in the armory, but also some spears and blunt weapons like maces. He only took a short look at the armory and they continued to the library. The library looked a lot better, despite a layer of dust covering great parts of it. Ikram, are there any books on skills? Like a lexicon with descriptions and acquisition requirements. Ikram gave him an askance glance, but went to one of the bookshelves and came back with a huge tome. This is not exactly what you asked for, but here is the catalogue of classes. It is sold by the system church. It only useful to people like nobles and lords, so you won't find it in any bookstores. The catalogue held an alphabetically order list of all common classes and their corresponding skills. When Seth laid eyes upon this book he finally realized. He had forgotten that he can read. Even the characters in a book given out by the system church made absolutely no sense to Seth. Based on your expression I would guess you can read this, Ikram asked with a smirk. No worries, I also wouldn't be able to read this normally. But you can read it. Ha! Of course, even if our city has fallen I am still a noble and acquired the universal translation skill, he said really smug. When you are a poor noble, you have to cherish the moments when you can still brag a little. Is it a class-specific skill or can I get this too? Seth asked with little hope. The library was completely useless to him if he could not decipher what was written. Ikram looked at loss when he saw Seth becoming a little depressed. Yes, technically you could if you get a skill book for universal translation. Unfortunately, you probably won't find one in Hike. It's a rare skill book and very expensive. You would need to travel to Oricode to try your luck and find one. I am pretty sure you could find one in the system auctioneers. System auctioneers? Is this another one of these system institutions? Seth asked puzzled. How many of these were there? You never heard of it? Yes, it's another organization working under the regulations of the system. People buy and sell anything there, as long as it is appraised and judged to be worthy. I don't know the specifics, but I heard from Father that they operate on the whole continent. If you can get that skill book anywhere for sure, then there, he shrugged. When Seth looked out of the window, he could see dusk approaching. It was time to return to Yudrid. He bid Ikram goodbye and picked up Aso on his way out. It was dark by the time they reached the old district and Aso was fumbling nervously as he led the way. Was he afraid? Oh yeah, Seth remembered what they were talking before. About how people started to vanish in the old district overnight. Was the beastman, who didn't hesitate to try and rob him, afraid of some monsters in the dark? Aso had grown up in this district and upon inquiry started telling all kinds of spooky stories about mysterious disappearances. While Seth wasn't really affected much, it was Aso himself becoming more and more nervous. Before he could become a hysteric wreck and run away, they finally reached Yudrid's big warehouse. They could barely see the river or the quay walls in the thick fog that lay like a thick soup over the district. It looked outlandish and toxic in the greenish-violet light of the moons. They knocked on the big doors of the warehouse and the echo was muffled in the fog. Silence followed. They awaited a moment and knocked again. Nothing happened. Standing in the dark weirdly colored fog in absolute silence, even Seth started getting nervous. Then suddenly the sound of steps in the fog. Slow, unsettling slow steps drew near them and then... "Oh, hey guys. Did you wait long? I had to get another bottle of booze." It sounded friendly as a dirty dwarf stepped out of the fog waving with a bottle of booze. Aso tensed up but didn't he say anything. Seth just started to relax when suddenly a giant axe came flying out of the fog and lodged itself into Yudred's head, almost splitting the face off her skull. The dead dwarf slumped over and a grubby little hand caught the bottle of booze before it could fall to the ground. Good thing he had calm reaction, or he might have screamed at that. "Goddamn vermin," Yudred cursed after taking her booze back, "how dare you steal my booze? These swamp sirens keep getting bolder," she mumbled and spit at the corpse on the ground. Now Aso relaxed, too. On the ground laid not a dwarf, but a repulsive swamp creature. Its upper body was roughly humanoid, looking like a terribly malnourished girl with big bulbous fish eyes. From the hip down it had the body of a black eel. Yudred's appearance before had all been an illusion to lure its prey. "See Monday in boys," Yudred said without giving the thing on the ground a second look as she unlocked the door and went in. "How did you know that was not Yudred?" Seth asked as they entered the warehouse that was now filled with the different parts of the juvenile. "Way too friendly," Aso said and shrugged, and he followed Yudred further into her shop while Seth waited in the storage space for them to come back. "All right, want me to walk you through everything?" Yudred asked once she had returned with Aso in tow. Seth agreed, and the dwarf starting listing and showing a whole slew of materials, of which only some could be assessed with Blacksmith's eyes. There were 150 teeth and over 300 ribs of different sizes and over 20 meter of snake leather she had pulled off in one piece. Here Yudred complained about all the small arrow wounds that had complicated her work. The 4 fangs were rated rare while the rest was uncommon material. He put it all in his inventory as he passed it. He had to take Yudred's words for granted when it came to other things, like the medicinal use of the different organs such as the liver or eyes. The meat had a strong smell and Yudred told him that she would not recommend anyone to eat this. It was not poisonous, but the taste and texture were not good. Still, into the inventory it goes. The next thing she brought out were 2 separate small boxes. The first held a bean-sized and milky transparent stone. It was smooth and had an uneven form that reminded of river gravel. "This is the magic core. I did not expect this beast to have one. Congrats." The next one was of little surprise after I saw the core, she said. Inventory. Lastly, she brought up the second box. In here was a small rough crystal glowing with a red sheen. He could see Aso's nervous reaction behind her. Was this the thing he needed? Lastly we have a carbuncle. Some call it Wyrm crystal or serpent pearl. It's a stone that grows in the brain of reptiles with the potential to rank up into dragon races. Even I have not seen many of these after so many years. Blacksmith's eyes reacted to the magic core, but not to the carbuncle. It was not a crafting material he could use. Yudred had read his expression and gave an explanation. "As you can probably see from Aso slowly turning into a nervous mess, this is the reason he approached you. Carbuncle have no other use than to increase the potential of beatsmen or reptilian pets and help them evolve. Don't get me wrong, this is plenty enough of use to make this thing extremely valuable," she added, which made Aso behind her look really depressed. The way she said it made it clear that there was no way for Aso to be able to pay for it. Seth took the box she handed him and looked clueless at the tiny stone. Looking at the depressed reptilian, Yudred scratched the messy hair on the back of her head and sighed. "You are a blacksmith, right?" the dwarf asked out of the blue. Seth could only nod at the sudden question and Yudred nodded. "You know, I raised this scaly idiot behind me, so his deeds are my responsibility too, I guess. But I also took a liking to him and spent over a decade raising him. This might be a little rude now, but would you be willing to trade the carbuncle with me?" The messy huntress finally came to the point. Chapter 55. Explanations and Excuses. "And what would you trade me for the carbuncle?" Seth asked, interested. An experienced hunter such as Yudred could have all kinds of interesting material. Upon his question the dwarf left the room and went back into her workshop, only to soon come back with a sizable chest in her hands. "In here are 2 ingots of dark steel and 5 chunks of black iron ore. I will waive the costs for dismantling the snake and give you another 25 gold on top. All of it together should come to a worth of about 80 gold, which is approximately as much as you would get for the carbuncle from a rich buyer," she said and opened the chest for Seth to see. "Black iron ore, crafting material. uncommon. Iron ore that has been exposed to natural mana and darkness for a long time. Can be smelted into black iron. Looking at the ore with Blacksmith's eyes gave him the catalog entry for black iron. Black iron, crafting material, uncommon. Black iron is as strong as high-quality steel and holds inherent affinity to darkness and magic, which can bring unexpected results when turned into equipment. Seth guessed that dark steel was made from black iron, as the description were almost the same. Dark steel, crafting material, rare. Dark steel is stronger than any regular steel and rivals the properties of mithril. It holds inherent affinity to darkness and magic, which can bring unexpected results when turned into equipment. The dark steel ingots were about as long as his hand and as thick as his wrist, while the chunks of black iron ore were comparable to his fist. The moment he saw them, he wanted them. He did not care whether what Yudrid said was true. He had no use for the carbuncle, but these materials made his heart race. He took the chest of materials away from her, before Yudrid could even comment at the fire in Seth's eyes. Deal, and the chest vanished in his inventory. Now everything from the dismantled juvenile and the new material had found their way into his inventory. And when the chest vanished into his inventory, he realized another thing. It had the same effect as the bags and was displayed as material chest. While Yudrid, who was surprised that Seth did not even try to haggle, went to get the gold, Seth started putting his valuable materials into the chest per drag and drop. Joining the new metals were the drake tooth, the boa fangs, the box with the magic core, the blood garnet and the 3 pieces of mithril ore. Aso knelt on the ground with the carbuncle in his hands. He looked like he was close to crying in joy. Was he going to swallow that thing? Did Yudrid even wash it, after pulling it from the snake's brain? Seth did not want to see that and averted his eyes. Yudrid came back and took the carbuncle away from Aso, who was about to kiss the thing. Stop slobbering all over it, I'm the one who bought it. And I will only give it to you when I am sure you learned your lesson, she grumbled and gave Seth the money. I guess, I will take my leave now. Hey Aso, can you bring me back to the inn? Seth asked. Oh, sure, Aso had already completely accepted his role as a free tour guide. Maybe he could train him to become a free butler? Nah. They entered the thick fog once again. Fortunately, the lizardman was able to find his way in this neighborhood even in the dark and they soon reached Seth's inn. Contrary to his expectation, Aso actually also entered the inn and took a room for the night. Maybe their short run-in with a swamp siren had shaken him up a little more than Seth thought. What Seth found when he finally entered the room was a pouting little fairy sitting on the pillow with crossed arms and legs. Where have you been? Finn was waiting. Finn wanted to eat together with Seth. Finn is now starving. Oh. Hey Finn, listen Seth wanted to explain, but was interrupted. No. Finn listen. Get Finn food first, the brutish diva demanded and left Seth no other choice than to go and get their dinner. They ate in uncomfortable silence as Finn kept shooting evil glares at him, over their food. Now. Talk, the tiny overlord demanded her explanation. So, he explained to her what had happened today. He talked about the pitiful excuse of a commercial district, hurried over how they might have to stay at the palace for a few weeks, because he made a deal with the Lord and the short story of how they met a swamp siren and got the materials from the big snake. So, we will stay here for a few weeks in a palace. Her pointy and sharp ears had easily picked up the information Seth had tried to hide by only mentioning it briefly. The young blacksmith sighed, why did she have to be so smart despite playing cute most of the time? Yeah, 2 maybe 3 weeks. It's really a wonderful opportunity to grind my skill and even get money for it. Finn aced disappointed and sighed. Okay then. I wanted to stay a little longer anyways. I still have no good clues about the former guild master. We missed the latest airship anyways. But try to be done in 3 weeks if we want to catch the next airship in Oricot. Otherwise, we will have to wait another 4 weeks, you know. Seth looked baffled at the little fairy. So, they had time anyways. He felt a lot better about their stay now. He had a lot of stuff to try out and finally the chance to experiment and grind again. Maybe they could even visit that dungeon? And he would have the chance to stay at a real palace. He rubbed his hands in anticipation of the royal chef's skills. Aso joined the two the next day during breakfast. He was still a valuable asset for Seth to get around in the city, so they talked about going to the guild and making this his menial quest for the time Seth stayed in Hike. When they were done with the breakfast, it was time for Seth to face his biggest obstacle. Harmond. He really liked this sympathetic hairy man, with great cooking skill, and did not know how to explain that they would move to the palace. He feared to hurt the older man's feelings. In the end he jumped over his shadow and explained his deal with the Lord to Harmond. "Oh, isn't that great for you? You got work. You worried about me? Haha, don't worry. Our business is doing great and you can come back anytime you want." Harmond reacted warm and understanding. He even wanted to give them the silver for the remaining 2 nights back, but kept it after Seth protested vehemently. With this they left behind the first inn of another world Seth had ever stayed in. Asso lead the way for Seth and Finn to the palace. They would take a look at their room before Finn would split off to look for information. Waiting in front of the palace was a man with a crazy white mane of hair. He wore a typical butler outfit and walked up to them when they entered the premises. "Hello there. Are you, Seth? The blacksmith the young lord talked about? My name is Ruslan, the head butler of His Highness. I will show you to your rooms." He gave them a heartwarming smile. They split off from Asso and the wholesome old man invited them into the palace. Seth had been here yesterday, but Finn ogled all the ornaments, busts, statues, and paintings that decorated the residence like a little kid in an amusement park. Ruslan gave them a little tour through the living space of the Lord and then brought them to the guest rooms. They were big luxurious rooms. You could tell it had been a long time since somebody lived here, but they were clean and well kept. While Finn stayed a little in them, enjoying the soft new mattress, Seth followed Ruslan to the armory. The armory was closer to the servant quarters that were to the back and kind of split off from the main complex. He had taken a short look at the armory yesterday and they didn't stay long. Seth asked the butler to bring him to the storage rooms. They had to cross the nearby servant quarters to get to the storage area. The staff rooms were tiny, narrow and run down. The bare stone walls were moist and moldy and what little tapestry could be seen was moth-eaten and slowly tuning to wet dirt or slime on the walls. The place was deserted. It was almost as if the old butler Ruslan was the only one still living in this desolate place. Ruslan stopped before a big once sturdy wooden door. Seth was sure it would fall apart if he touched it a little too roughly. The old man took a small magic lantern from the niche in the wall beside the door. "This is the door to the basement. All the weapons and other equipment are stored down there. The Lord told me that if there is anything else you fancy down there, you can take it. My old bones can't handle the steps down anymore. I hope you can forgive me for not coming with you." He gave Seth a warm smile and handed him the lantern and a key ring for the storage room and basement. And thus, began Seth's descent into the basement of the palace. Chapter 56. First Dungeon. The little magic lantern was just enough to illuminate the narrow staircase down. The steps were moist and the air smelled of mold, earth, or maybe it was decay. Seth understood now how their weapons were in such a bad condition. The humidity of the surrounding marshland was ubiquitous, but it became really clear as he entered the damp basement vault. It reminded him more of a maze-like medieval prison than a storage area. There were many doors to storage rooms along a narrow corridor with an arched ceiling whose end vanished in the darkness beyond the shine of the lantern. If the doors had small barred windows, he was sure this could have been used to imprison people. It was dark, wet, and cold, but nothing indicated this was anything other than an old basement. Following his practice from games, he started searching the rooms one by one. The first 2 rooms made him stumble back out, holding his nose. The smell was terrible as the rooms were filled with barrels and boxes of food that had all disintegrated into a disgusting black sludge that was slowly oozing from the containers. No wonder he barely managed to turn the key in the rusted lock. Nobody had come here in ages to look at the food. Or maybe it was on purpose because nobody wanted to clean up this mess. He hurriedly locked those doors back up and carved a little X above the handle. It was his way to mark them, so he could be sure which he had checked or not. In the next 2 rooms he found the scrapped weapons he had heard about. Negligently tossed into the room he found damaged boxes with broken weapons. The floor was covered in rusty metal shards and broken shafts of pole arms. Looking around the room with Blacksmith's eyes showed him a plethora of item windows describing broken equipment and metal shards ranging from much medium iron to some high-quality steel. Those must be the remnants of the weapons they had when the city prospered. Just as Seth started to worry about how to store all this, he thought of the material box. When he tried to store the boxes in the room it actually appeared in his inventory as weapons crate, damaged, and these boxes stacked, too. This was a great find, since this meant that he could use items like this in the future and not clog up his inventory slots with all kinds of weapons he could not stack. Subsequently shoved all the broken weapons into the crates and put them in the inventory. The little metal shards and scrap pieces could be stacked and took on the universal shape of metal scrap, small, the size of a playing card, after entering his inventory. When he was done, he had almost 2 stacks of scraps and 12 crates filled with broken weapons and padding material. The next 3 rooms held various kind of damaged armor pieces and sets that were carelessly thrown onto a heap along the wall opposing the door. There were not crates or anything. What was left of once glorious armors turned into 3 stacks of metal scrap, big, the size of a handprint, from bracers, greaves and helmets, 2 stacks of metal scrap, small, from more detailed works like scale armor, a stack of bronze scrap, from once elaborate breastplates and half a stack of damaged chainmail pieces. The wet, moldy, and damaged leather parts that were strewn around smelled disgusting and seemed unusable, so Seth left them behind. The next room he wanted to check was filled with all kinds of old chairs and tables. Thick dust and spider webs covered everything, but they had not grown moldy yet. Probably furniture stored for feast and stuff like that? Seth shrugged and closed the door again. The next room also held furniture. Seth rubbed his hand and concluded that he was done collecting the broken stuff. He still had not plundered the armory, but this was already quite the booty. Looking down the long corridor, there were still a lot of doors to check. There were still those old weapons stored somewhere down here. And in this manner Seth kept working his way down into these winding entrails of the palace. He came across a lot of similar rooms. Some held old furniture that was put down here a long time ago, other only scraps that made it impossible for Seth to discern what his once was. The further he went, the more neglected the basement looked. Dirt and mud covered the stone tiles and filled the corners of the walls. Some rooms were simply empty and their floors seemed to be covered in rotten hay aside from the dirt and dust. Where were those old weapons? He could not have passed them, right? He had checked every door. The next door Seth stopped before already had a small little X above it handles. When he opened it, he saw smelly leather scraps covering the ground. His heart sank. You got to be kidding me. A room he had already checked had suddenly appeared before him. All right then. Whatever did this, Seth doubted he could simply go back now. He decided to be careful and keep exploring. He had the gnawing suspicion that he might have entered a dungeon. Seth wanted to pull out his sword, just to be ready in case something happened. In this moment he belatedly realized that a long sword was not really fit to fight in such an enclosed space. The space in the basement was too narrow. With his skill, he risked to hit the ceiling, wall, floor, or doors, if he was to start fighting here. Whatever black magic fuckery he had been caught in, he was not aptly prepared for it. Haha. What was he a blacksmith for? He took a slow step back, entered the room with the leather scraps and locked the door behind him. He sat down and pondered what weapon would be the most fitting in his situation. Seth did not know whether he was watched, or not, but he fathomed he had not much time. The situation might change when whatever it was realized that he noticed something. So, it had to be something small he could do fast, like a dagger, a short sword, a club, or a mace maybe. A spear could work very well. But Seth had not seen any wood long enough to make a good spear. He suddenly had an idea as he was looking through his inventory. He summoned the spirit forge and the anvil of Tartarus in the empty room. It was his first chance to give the anvil a good look. Aside from its grown size, its sides were covered in peculiar reliefs depicting scenes from heaven and Tartarus, separated by ornate pillars, and bordered by Greek key. The first thing he did was fixing and equipping his armor. Next, he carefully left the room and walked back to one of the furniture rooms in a slow and controlled pace. Sure, it was a risk to just walk around in armor and alarm someone with it, but he rather had the armor on in case he was attacked, than trying to be a smarty-pants. He came back after securing a table and some chairs, closing the door with a sigh behind him. Now, he brought up the menu of blueprint. It had been a long time since he had created something original, but the handling was very user-friendly. He had the idea when looking at the snake ribs in his inventory. Their natural curve reminded him of a sword he had recently seen, the Kapesh. He loaded in the ribs and fangs of the juvenile as a material and created a blueprint for the serpent Kapesh. Serpent Kapesh. Uncommon rare. Damage, 100 to 200. Durability, 350 to 500. Possible option, inflict enemies with poison status. A short sword in the form of Kapesh designed by an aspiring blacksmith. It uses the bones or the fangs of a giant snake as a material for the blade. The performance depends on the used material. Bone is an unfavorable material for a blade. Damage can only be repaired in exchange for permanently lowered durability. 25% chance to cause bleeding. In the following hour he smelted some of the metal scrap into high-quality steel. The success rate was not very high with 45%, but in exchange the recipe was quite simple. He just needed to introduce additional carbon during the smelting process. How? For example, burning some wood in the smelter. The smelting menu did the rest. Even if it failed, he did not mind. Seth did not need a lot. He activated the blueprint and with some system guidance succeeded in splitting one of the ribs lengthwise. He drilled holes and sharpened the crescent edge of the rib making a rib blade. He started infusing the soul, small, of one of the small snakes into a piece of snake leather, the rib blade, and the steel as he forged a steel spine that was riveted to the blade. Seth used the piece of snake leather to wrap the handle. When he summoned the water barrel and dunked the whole weapon into it, to affix the soul completely to the weapon he got a different system notification, aside from the regular completion notification. Ding! Materials used have a strong affinity with the infused souls and have created a synergistic effect. Serpent Kapesh Plus. Uncommon Plus. Damage, 140 to 180. Durability, 480. 1 every second slash will add +1 to poison status. A hurriedly made Serpent Kapesh made by its aspiring creator. Thanks to special treatment this weapon has reached a high performance, despite a rough execution and lacking experience. 10% chance to cause bleeding. Good enough, Seth said satisfied, not fazed by the system's critique. Now, he had a short sword and his gauntlets for melee damage. After he fashioned a simple shield from the scavenged tabletop, Seth was done with preparing his secondary weapons. He was ready to continue looting the basement. Chapter 57. First Dungeon, 2. Seth walked along the dark and narrow basement corridor with just the little magic lantern. It led like a brick-walled tube further and further into the darkness. He kept checking and marking the doors on either side of the way. He had not seen any forks or crossroad yet. Recently most of the new rooms he came across were empty. Once in a while there was one with some furniture or other junk. He would have probably stopped walking or changed direction if the corridor was not slowly changing like this. It was a chest he had found in one room, that looked empty at first glance. Unsure whether it was maybe a mimic or a trap, Seth had shot it with an arrow. The impact of the arrow activated a trap and giant steel jaws snapped out of the ground like a bear trap. It would have decapitated someone kneeling in front of the chest, or cut someone stand there in half. The chest was empty and useless, but Seth happily stored the trap's jaws. He had probably been luck, that the hallway was not booby-trapped until now. He became even more careful when treading on the stone-tiled floor and only gave the most rooms a cursory look without stepping in. One thing was clear, he had most likely entered a dungeon. He noticed that something was wrong, when he opened a new door and a terrible stench wafted against him. It was exactly the same room as the first one he checked. Barrels and boxes filled with rotten and unidentifiable stuff. There was even still his footprint on the floor in the terribly smelling sludge. But the door had no mark. "Don't tell me the doors change, too," Seth mumbled. If not, only the rooms changed positions, but the doors too, then his marks were useless. Then what could he possibly do? An amused smirk crept on his face. He took out a broken chair leg and set fire to the doors. Seth did not think the dungeon would regenerate the doors, since the marks left on the doors were still there. So, he leisurely walked down the corridor and set fire to the door left and right, after taking a look into the room. Soon rooms without door started appearing in front of him. Some he had seen, some he had not. Kriu. Suddenly he heard a sound that did not fit the deserted basement. It was a quirky high-pitched cry somewhere in the darkness in front. Seth took out a fist-sized chunk of table leg, set it ablaze and chucked it into the darkness. Kriuga. The ball of bright fire illuminated the path before him and hit something small standing on the path. It fell beside the creature on the floor and bathed it in pale blue light. It looked like a repulsive little piranha with bulging eyes, buck teeth, and 4 thin limbs. It reached about the height of Seth's knee and its 4 limbs it held onto a tiny trident. Seth didn't know what this creature was, but he didn't hesitate. Thunk. Ding. You have killed Swamp Pygmy Leave 9. You have earned experience. 1 arrow easily ended the little guy's life. Seth observed the corpse from afar and it vanished shortly after. The last indicator that he really was in a dungeon. The palace's basement had really turned into a dungeon. And he still had not found the rest of the weapons. He felt a little annoyed, since he had no idea whether he could just leave by going back. Or did he have to find the dungeon core first? Yet, let us turn around. He turned around and what he saw was a wall. I guess, dungeon core it is then, he shrugged and turned towards the dark tunnel before him. The dungeon had obviously changed. There were no more doors leading to the rooms and they were merely dark holes along the barely lit walls. Seth did not trust the darkness and started throwing burning pieces of wood to light up the path before him. The corridor slowly turned into an earthy tunnel like the burrow of a beast. Once in a while he met some swamp pygmy in the rooms, but they were mostly empty. A disgusting stench wafted into his nose and he soon found the source. Corpses started to occasionally appear in the holes on either side of the way. Their half-eaten and rotting bodies were covered in rags that resembled the servant uniforms of the palace. Was this the reason the staff rooms had been so empty? More and more rooms held an increasing number of decaying bodies. Some already looked old and dried up. How long had servants been vanishing from the palace? Or were these people maybe those who had vanished in the old district? Maybe some of them, but probably not all vanished end up here, he thought, remembering the swamp siren Yudrid had killed. However, one thing was clear. There had to be something more dangerous than those pygmies. The scene remembered him of a game. He had played Dead Galaxy and he knew not to trust a peaceful-looking corpses. Not to mention, that he had seen real undead quite often recently. Seth burned each and every corpse he came across as he walked down the path. After a while walking the tunnel finally widened into a big cavern. The stench made him gag and his eyes water. His lantern started flickering. Roots were hanging down from a low ceiling and there was an irregular crystal sphere in the middle of the room. The last thing he saw in the flickering light of his lantern was a heap of corpses laid in a ring around the sphere on the ground. Then the lantern went dark. As if it was perfectly timed. The pieces of wood in the tunnel behind him had long burned out and Seth stood in perfect darkness. He waited. Just a moment. Then, as fast as he could, he started throwing out burning pieces of wood in all direction. The sudden bright light flooded the room and fell on a disturbing figure. An emaciated man wearing the uniform of a butler, with a giant mane of bleached white hair hung on the ceiling above him like a gecko. Bulging eyes, the size of tennis balls and dry taut lips exposing a moth of circular positioned teeth. It was the terribly distorted form of Ruslan, the oh-so-benevolent smiling head butler. Ksha! Ruslan hissed as the bright light fell into his giant bulging eyes and subsequently fell off the ceiling when he tried to cover his eyes. Seth aimed for the moment he fell and gave him a vicious slash with the kapesh, but the skinny old man managed to move his center of gravity in midair and turned the deadly slash into a shallow cut that damaged his clothing but merely grazed the skin. Show! You are stronger than I thought for a blacksmith, it spat out and waved its hand. The air flickering like a mirage and it vanished. Seth hurriedly looked around and tried to listen for steps. When he closed his eyes to concentrate on the cracking of the flames and the sound beyond it, it actually started vanishing. The smell vanished. When he opened his eyes, he was home. His real home. He was in his room and murky sunlight fell in through the window. He heard laughter in the living room. The bell-like voice of a woman and a deep baritone of a man talking and laughing. He left his room and entered the living room. There they sat on the couch watching TV. As if it was the most normal thing in the world. There sat his parents. His mom and dad watching one of his dad's favorite survival documentaries together. Tears welled up in his eyes. No. It couldn't be true. He looked for the weapon in his hand, but it was gone. He wore a simple t-shirt and pajama pants. Dear, what is it? Did we wake you up? Come sit down and watch with us, the clear sound of his mom's voice entered his ears. The fought down the tears. He ground his teeth and clenched his fists. His mother stood up and approached him. She looked just like he remembered, with hair as dark as his and small laugh lines around her eyes. A bittersweet sadness filled his heart and mixed with a burning fury. He knew it was an illusion and hated that it was an illusion. But he could not move as his mother approached him and a searing pain overwhelmed his mind. The illusion waned and the scene before his eyes melted away. Where his mother had stood was the distorted grimace of Ruslan. Ugh! The creature's hand was deeply embedded into his belly, rummaging through his entrails. Chech, people fall so easily for these simple illuthionth, it laughed maniacally. You! The laughter was stifled as two hands with an iron grip closed around the monster's throat. This was personal. Seth had let go of weapon and shield and started choking the laughing Ruslan's neck with his bare hands. Chu can suffocate met. I can. Seth let go of all reason and just started pumping his raw uncontrollable rage into a jet flame of fire exploding from his body. The creature screeched. It scratched. Its claw-like nail ripped apart his skin and flesh, but it was too late. Rustlin in his hands burned. His clothes burned. His armor melted. He cared no more. He fueled his fire with his emotions and watched Rustlin melt away, burn away, until there was nothing more than ash. Ding! Congratulations! You have killed Dungeon Master Rustlin. Leave 20. You have earned experience. Ding! You have leveled up. You are now leave 18. Ding! Title, Dungeon Conqueror gained. You have killed every monster and the master of a dungeon. All attributes increase by 10% in dungeons. Ding! Skill, Fire Affinity leave 9 has become. A terrible headache, like a stab with a knife, assaulted his brain and the system notifications were pushed into the background. He zones out and everything became dark. Ding! You have died. Chapter 58. Aftermath. I see. You are only briefly visiting. Seth stood in a wide black desert under a black sky with a dim grey sun. Before him stood a giant dwarf made of soul fire, illuminating the dreary scenery. His booming voice vibrated deep in Seth's chest. You combined my class with an interesting skill. But you still have a lot to learn. It's good you are only here temporarily, you have barely started inheriting my legacy. Who are? Seth started, but the giant dwarf interrupted him. Time's up. Little one, you have to go now. Just a last piece of advice, grow stronger if you really wish to inherit my legacy. With this, he vanished and left him in the twilight that became increasingly darker. Seth. Seth, are you okay? Why did you revive at the guild? Did you enter a dungeon? The hysteric fairy frantically asked the still groggy Seth. Did he dream something? Looking around he saw himself lying on a couch in one of the meeting rooms of the guild. Completely naked, except for a blanket put on him out of courtesy. Calm down, Finn. The guild, Seth mumbled and remembered what happened in the basement of the palace. He blacked out after killing whatever Rustlin had become. The terrible headache, did he die from overusing mental power? Name, Seth Smith. Mark of Visor. Title, Faster Than the Thought. Level, 17. EXP, 85%. Race, Orihuma. Sex, male. Age 23. Class, Spirit Blacksmith, unique. Affiliation, System Church. Health, 1000/1000. Mana, 170. Strength 55. Dexterity 55. Agility, 38. Intelligence 17. Willpower 35. Endurance 45. Personality 12. Luck 18, plus 10. Free AP, Attribute points 0. Free SP, Skill points 0. Defense. Physical, 185, 135 plus 50, ENDX 3. Magical, 95, 70 plus 25, WILX 2. Fire immunity. He was fully healed and recovered. He was lucky this happened in a dungeon. Wait. He seemed to remember he had reached leave 18. So, his level could even fall from the experience loss. On top of it, Seth had totally burned all of his equipment, even his ring. Even the boss soul. Why did he have to lose control like this? Skill window. Blacksmith, Apprentice, leave 7, 47%. Enchantment, Beginner, leave 1. Goldsmith, Beginner, leave 1. Blacksmith size leave 4. Blueprint, Apprentice, leave 2. Soul Infusion leave 2. Spirit Smithy leave 4. Spirit Capture leave 3. Weapon Mastery, Adept, leave 5, 35%. Calm Reaction, Passive, leave 7. Fear Resistance leave 8. Fire Affection leave 1. Fire Manipulation leave 7. Map leave 4. Observation leave 3. Concealment leave 4. Was this the reason fire resistance had finally changed? He had lost consciousness before he could hear the notice completely, but fire affinity must have ranked up to fire affection when it reached leave 10. Overall, he should consider this a net profit. He lost his armor and that capesh, but he could make those anytime. On the other hand, he still made some experience and his skill ranked up. Even so, the reason was not quite pleasant. Remembering what happened, he hurriedly shoved back the memory of his parents. This adventure had reopened an old wound, but he had no time dealing with it. He shooed Finn out of the room and got dressed. Olivia heard the commotion and soon entered the room. Fortunately, Seth was fully dressed at this point. As the current de facto head of the guild, his dying in an unregistered dungeon was a matter she had to deal with. Seth had not much to hide and roughly told her what happened, omitting how exactly he used his skill to turn the dungeon master into a pile of ashes. She was shocked hearing of all the corpses. Her panicked expression loosened a bit when Seth told her how he burned them. Seth asked her about it and she confirmed his hunch. Normally corpses, not matter monsters or not, would vanish in a dungeon. He had dodged a bullet by burning them before they were awakened as dungeon mobs. Still, an unnoticed dungeon in the middle of the city with this many victims. It was another sign of just how understaffed and derelict the local guild branch truly had become. The guild master was still missing, so she could not make any executive decisions, but Olivia told them that she would deal with the aftermath. Such as informing the lord and the headquarters. Still, she asked Seth not to enter that dungeon before things were under control. Seth had no plans to enter a dungeon before he made another set of equipment, anyway. He just felt a little peeved about not getting those stored weapons. He could just shrug his shoulders and let it go. It was already late and Seth just experienced his first death, so he and Finn went to town to eat a good meal and get drunk. It was late in the night when they returned to the palace. The lord had already been informed about his head butler being a diabolical monster feeding on his staff and citizens and trying to kill his new guest, just to be counter-killed. The drunk fairy and blacksmith were welcomed by a pair of maids. Originally the lord wanted to talk to them now, but when he heard they were totally hammered, he changed the date to tomorrow. The maids brought them to their room, where they fell asleep the moment they touched the bed. Seth woke up to the high-pitched snoring in his ears. It had a terrible effect on his headache, thanks to the hangover. He had a really disgusting taste in his mouth and could not remember what happened yesterday evening. He left the sleeping fairy behind and went to wash up in the bathroom, connected to their room. When he stepped outside his room afterward, a maid was already waiting for him outside. He had a nice talk with the lord about what happened and a healer actually got rid of his hangover for him. All that was left was to have a scrumptious breakfast made by the palace chef. It could barely compare to the feast he had with Simon, but there was no one vying for his food this time. The sleepy fairy was no opponent for him at the dining table. Now, Seth felt a lot better. He got a once-over by the palace healer and felt great. He would finally start crafting again. He entered the armory with a motivated gait and summoned the full smithy in the connected room. The spirit forge, the furnace, the anvil, the grinding wheel, the barrel and the new additions, engraving and jeweler's table. The engraving table was a big workbench with many engraving tools and a magic formation covering the whole tabletop. It could be used to power an engraved magic formation that would absorb mana from the surroundings and test for mistakes and problems. It was very interesting. The jeweler's table on the other hand was a workbench with a semicircle cutout with a back to catch precious metal dust and scrap when working on jewelry. It had a lot of tools for small and precise work such as a saw with very thin saw blades, files, a tiny burner spitting soul fire, pincer, and so on. It was a little longer and on the other side was the setup for cutting gems, like a jeweler loop and a fine grinding wheel and such. This table was the first normal-looking crafting station beside the simple workbench beside the forge. When he laid his hand on the tabletop, a window popped up. "Are you willing to take the dexterity test to permanently unlock the jeweler's table? Y/N." Seth suddenly remembered that it really had said that this crafting station would need a test to be unlocked. He finally had time and peace, so he clicked yes. Ding! A quest has been triggered. Quest: make a fine gold chain. Difficulty: D. Jeweler's table is temporarily unlocked. To unlock the crafting station jeweler's table permanently, you have to prove your dexterity and make a fine gold chain. Requirement: fine gold chain 0/1. Rewards: permanently unlock jeweler's table. Do you accept the quest? Of course, he accepted. He looked into the blueprints for goldsmith and found the fine gold chain. It had a dexterity requirement of 50, so Seth barely met the prerequisite to be able to craft it. But first, he needed to make fine gold wire, so he started up the forge and forged one of his gold ingots into a thin bar. When it was thin enough, he was able to use a device that was part of the jeweler's table. Before he could only hammer or draw wire, but this device used a roller to make the wire finer and finer. He followed the blueprint's instructions to make fine rings and link them up into a thin and light golden chain. It was not perfect, as if it was made by a machine, but it had its own charm. Ding! You have created your first accessory. Dex +1 proficiency earned. His goldsmith, beginner, leave 1 actually increased by 75% with just this one simple chain. Sure, it was fine, but it was not difficult, thanks to his already high dexterity. With his current dexterity, he had a good foundation to level his goldsmith skill. Ding! You have completed the quest, make a fine gold chain, you have permanently unlocked Jeweler's Table. Chapter 59. A Day in Hike. Now that this was out of the way, Seth could concentrate on all the small things that had cropped up until now. The easiest thing was to finally scan the ancient bronze trinkets that held some damaged enchantments. He had 5 trinkets that showed sign of simple magic circuits. When he scanned them, he got fragmented circuits. Luckily 3 of the 5 were complementary and turned into one enchantment that could increase the wearer's defense and health regeneration. So, it did something similar to the endurance attribute. The other 2 fragments stayed in his catalog as parts of a circuit. This meant he now had 3 magic circuits to increase health, durability, and damage. He had nothing to enchant at the moment, so he continued with smelting. He had a lot to smelt. The weapons in the armory, the scraps he got in the dungeon, the ancient bronze, but first came his electron bars. He would split them into gold and silver bars. Another thing he wanted to do was smelt the jewelry he had brought with him from Deltan. He had found out that simple jewelry was not worth much more than the materials it was made of, if it had no effects. Another thing he realized was, that most enchantments needed a secondary energy store or source to take effect. It would normally either be the user supplying the magic, a gemstone storing the magic, or a magic core from a beast. It was something he wanted to try later, because the special weapons he made with soul infusion did not need him to input magic power. Seth wanted to see, if he could make permanent enchantments, if he managed to connect the magic circuit with the power of the souls. But this was something for a lot later. Now, he first harvested all the gemstones from the jewelry and smelted it down. It was too hard to enchant already finished products, so he could only save the gemstones for later and get the raw materials. Putting the jewelry, which was also an alloy of gold and silver, and the electron bars into the furnace, Seth started concentration on manipulating the furnace. He could distinctly feel the difference between fire affinity and fire affection. He could feel the temperature a lot more distinctly, and he felt that the fire itself tried following his will on its own accord, and it needed a lot less mental power from Seth. He minutely controlled the temperature in the furnace, and once the contents were fully melted, the silver, gold and other metals in there started separating into different layers corresponding to their density. Once the alloys had separated, he was able to drain them one by one and turn them into ingots. He ended up with mostly gold and silver, but also some small pieces of metals like platinum and copper. Interestingly, platinum was worthless as a crafting material for equipment, because it conducted magic even worse than steel. After splitting all the precious metal and gems and putting them back into his material chest, he decided that this was enough for a morning work and went for lunch. Chef's day. There he was again. The palace chef was sweating blood and tears watching Seth decimating the food he and his colleagues kept throwing at him. He was a bottomless eater, and they could barely keep up with the speed he swallowed their creations. Did he even chew? The chef had a serious suspicion that Seth was just sucking it in and swallowed it like a snake. It would not have been as bad, if that fairy was not seriously trying to compete with him and ate several times her own body weight. The blacksmith was one thing, but where did that food even go, once it entered this deceptively cute tiny mouth? Free food was probably the worst deal the Lord could have made with this man. Once his stomach's demands were pacified, Seth went back to the armory. Finn followed him after lunch and watched him do his work. He spent the rest of the day smelting down the metal scraps and broken weapons he got from the dungeon and turned it all into 4 full stacks of high-quality steel and 1 stack of generic bronze ingots. He stopped in the evening to go and have dinner with Finn, the Lord, and Ikram. Finn's day. Finn had left the palace after a lonely breakfast. Seth had not woken her up, so they could eat together, and she felt a little peeved. Did he fear her stealing his food that much? She would totally decimate lunch as a punishment. Just you wait, she thought with tiny clenched fists. That said, she had no idea where to continue today. She had spent the last days to look for an information broker or some underground organization to find the guild master. Even organized crime and shady businesses had given up on Hike. There were no professionals to find. It had been easy to find the information about traveling. People often wanted to leave this place. She just had to visit a local commerce guild, even so it didn't look much better than the desolate adventurer guild. Finn was not in the mood to look at bars or local businesses. There were little people with loose lips getting drunk at this time of the day. The biggest problem was that there were just no people who still knew the guild master. It had just been too long. In the end Finn decided to try her luck with the guild, again. Maybe Olivia had some tips who she could ask. Someone who knows the guild master, Olivia asked puzzled after the fairy had requested a conversation in her office. Maybe there is. Wait a moment, she stood up and opened a cabinet beside her desk to skim a bunch of folders. After a short while she put a document before the little fairy standing on her desk. This is the form of a retired adventurer. Old Man Jenkins was one of the older generation of adventurers. He retired some time before the Ivisor incident. If he is still in town, he may be able to tell you more about the guild master and her whereabouts, Olivia asserted. Finn nodded. Are there any more of the older generation? If old Jenkins did not talk, it would be good to visit someone else. Unfortunately, they all either left, or died. After the younger generation vanished, many of the old ones came forth to try and help the situation. Although the system alleviates many problems, age still has a price. Many of them vanished in the swamps. She looked absent-mindedly into the distance. Maybe this was also one of the reasons the guild master had given up. Watching this, many old friends and people she saw grow up die. Everyone except old Jenkins left afterwards. As long as they still had savings, they rather moved with their families to Oricote. So old Jenkins was Finn's only chance. The fairy thanked the head receptionist and soon left he guild. She had met Mary on her way out. The girl was very motivated and friendly to Finn. She felt very indebted to the fairy for what happened last time and invited Finn for a small brunch. Finn was not in a hurry and accepted. They actually went to the eatery where Finn and Seth had stayed until recently. Hi, Harmond. The usual, she greeted the innkeeper and ordering at the same time. Seeing the mountains of food that came on Finn's order, Mary got goosebumps. She had invited the fairy and wondered whether she would be able to financially recover from this. But looking at the innocent smile of the little sunshine calmed her heart and made it all worth it. They talked about how Seth was occupied with his work and Finn was bored looking for the guild master and her problems. Grandpa Jenkins? You think Uncle would know about it? It's my only chance, Finn answered with a smile and slobbered her dish clean. Old Jenkins was her grandfather and the one who had helped her get the job in the guild. Mary offered to ask him to meet Finn in the coming days and they split up. Finn returned to the palace to look for Seth. Chapter 60. Ancient Bronze. Ancient Bronze. Seth had used the last day to collect more experience in smelting and the use of his new skill. The skill had improved his efficiency tremendously and after yesterday he felt like his fire manipulation was close to level up. He wanted to start and melt down the ancient bronze trinkets and weapons he bought. Maybe he could even find out the recipe, if he managed to split the alloy. He would be the only one who could produce ancient bronze at the present, a material with strength comparable to high-quality steel and magic conductivity comparable to mithril. So, in the morning, after a good breakfast, Seth sat before the furnace and dropped the pieces of ancient bronze into the opening. He had gotten some experience with bronze yesterday and could tell that it took much longer to melt than common bronze. It took even more heat than the steel. Slowly the metal with a golden sheen started to heat up in the furnace and liquefied into a brightly glowing puddle of doom. When Seth used fire manipulation in combination with the furnace he could kind of feel the heat of different components in the liquid. The process was a lot harder than simply using the smelting menu, but also more precise. Compared to the bronze or the electrum yesterday, ancient bronze behaved a lot differently. Despite obviously being an alloy, the components would not split as Seth controlled the heat. The metal stuck together as if glued, staying as a homogeneous liquid form of ancient bronze. Something held them together. It was when Seth poured it into the ingot mold that he saw the glimmer of an unknown energy given off by the liquid metal. It strongly reminded him of the glow souls gave off. Was this possible? Was ancient bronze made by infusing souls directly into an alloy instead of a weapon? Seth had never tried melting down a weapon he had infused with a soul, but he fathomed they would vanish. Destroying the weapon would be like the body dying, the soul would not stay within the metal, would it? Also, the description of the metal he used had never changed. Steel never changed to soul steel or something like that. But this glow was astonishingly reminiscent of souls. Maybe he could make new alloys himself, when soul infusion became a higher level. As Seth could not get behind the secret for now, he just melted the bronze down into 6 ingots of ancient bronze. He put the bronze into his material chest. He was not sure what he would do with it yet, but it was definitely precious. Seth had also investigated smelting the mithril ore and dark iron. He could have made dark iron ingots, but he lacked a special mineral to make dark steel, so he left them as is. The 3 small pieces of mithril ore came together as an ingot the size of his pinky. When Seth tried to smith it, to see how it felt, it was the first time he had a problem. Ding! The skill level of Blacksmith is too low to work with this material. His skill level was too low to forge with mithril. Did this mean? Ding! The skill level of Blacksmith is too low to work with this material. He also could not use the snake fang. He didn't even try the blood garnet, since his goldsmith was still level 1. There was actually a restriction to the kind of materials he could use. No problem at all. He could grind it as much as he wanted while he was here. And he already knew how. Seth would start with the swords for the guards. Why swords? Because the process to make a sword was already ingrained into him and he could make them out of uncommon high-quality steel now. He could make them fast and maximize the experience boost of free use. And to make them comparable to his own sword, he would engrave the circuits for damage. Just like that he could grind his blacksmith and enchantment skills. Engraving an even surface of steel should be the easiest, another reason to start with the swords. Then came the spears and the armor. He planned to imitate the spikes he had seen on the bazar. He had found several new types of arrowheads in the armory and among them was a style called bodkin that was the same shape as those spear spikes. It said it was good for armor piercing. This should work well against the scales and thick skin of the swamp creatures he had heard about. If he added barbs, like a harpoon, the spear could be used to control the slippery opponent's movements. He would have to talk with the guards to find out the specifics. After thinking this far, he simply started forging. After gaining fire immunity, Seth had tried something he did not dare before. Instead of using the tongs to hold the hot metal, he used his bare hands now. This made it a lot easier to hold the metal steady. He forged the first sword blade in less than an hour. It still had some superficial flaws, but they did not matter after he refined the blade on the grinding wheel. Then came the heat treatment. He had decided to engrave the blade after he finished it. It would be more difficult to engrave the tempered steel, but he could dodge problems with the blade warping or breaking when he tempered it after the engraving. Although, it didn't happen as often lately, but it would still be a great loss of time, if all the engraving was for naught. He had another way to speed up the process. Instead of finishing the swords one by one, he would forge and engrave the 30 blades before adding the crossguards and handles. Like this, Seth could concentrate on one task at the time. He would not get any experience on his blacksmith until the swords were finished, but he would get one massive chunk once he was done. Let us leave Seth alone for the moment, as he makes blades like a machine, and look at what Finn is doing. The little fairy was on her way to meet Old Man Jenkins to ask him about the mystery of the vanished guild master. Detective Finn finally had a lead and she would squeeze out all the information from that old man. She just hoped she was not forced to use unorthodox methods. Of course, this was just a joke. The old man was Mary's uncle, so she couldn't just treat him like a thug, but if the old man did not talk, Finn rubbed her hand maliciously. Any thoughts of using unorthodox methods vanished when she came before Old Man Jenkins. What old man? Sure, his beard was a little grayed, but what was up with that build? When Finn came before Old Man Jenkins with Mary, she saw a 2-meter-tall mountain of a man. His worn clothes could barely contain the bulging muscles of this aged behemoth. Was this even a human? The bald muscular man had a deep and aged voice. So? Mary said you wanted to ask me something, he questioned with an amused glint in his eyes. He knew the reaction of people who met him for the first time. It was especially amusing seeing a tiny fairy widen her already big black eyes upon seeing him. The old guild master, he asked, running his fingers through his beard, and sighed. She really let herself go lately. It's a shame seeing someone so motivated turn into a drunkard. Finn asked, baffled. Until now she had never picked up on the guild master's identity. Yes. Yudrid was the best huntress in the city back then when I started as an adventurer. She played a significant role in the prosperity of this place, he sighed. Back then she was like a mother to many of the adventurers, and to some she was. What happened in Ivisor and afterwards really broke her. Can you tell Finn where she is? Please? Finn and Seth have a quest we can only finish with her help. Let me think, he said, made some hums and grunts and, nope, no idea. Sorry. Jenkins gave her a big grin. He totally knew where she was and did not want to tell her. Mean old big human. You know where she is? Finn knows. Tell Finn. Don't think Finn 1T beat it out of you. Finn is definitely not intimidated by your bulging masses of, the fairy stuttered and became silent again. She didn't want to get into a fight with Jenkins, for Mary's sake. Not because she was uncertain that she could intimidate Jenkins, not to mention win a fight against him. All she could do was to hang her head and hold back her tears. Looking at the depressed fairy softened Jenkins' brain. Could you fake your sorrow even more obviously? Finn felt dismayed. Even the big teary puppy eyes had not worked on the old humanoid meat mountain. Finn had never encountered such a tough cookie. Not even when she plundered the old cookie jar of her grandma, those cookies had hardened for several decades. Should she really resort to throwing a tantrum? In her life there had only been 4 times that she had to resort to throwing a tantrum. It was an ultimate technique of the fair folk and should only be used as a last resort. You have forced my hand. Finn took a deep breath and was about to throw her little body flat on the table, when Jenkins finally reached out his hand. Stop. Please. Jenkins said in a hurry. He could not take it anymore. Watching the fairy embarrass herself in public just made him cringe too hard. She is probably hiding somewhere in the old district. That all I will tell you. Now stop whatever you were about to do. The tantrum had worked once again. As expected from an ultimate weapon, just the indications of its execution made the opponent buckle and divulge all their secrets. The fairy almost burst with pride upon her impeccable interrogation skills. Now she only had to find out where in the old district the guild master was hiding.